The clock ticked low and steady, each beat a soft knock against the quiet of the house. A faint gull cried beyond the window, its call carried on a breeze that smelled of jasmine and distant salt. My fingers brushed the cool brass of Evelyn's locket as I lifted it from the velvet lining of the nightstand, the metal surprising me with its chill against my warm palm. I had not opened the locket since the hinge gave a quiet sigh, and the tiny portrait inside caught the morning light. An image of us on the sea grace, her smile bright, my arm around her shoulders. On the back of the photograph, a series of numbers had been etched in a hurried hand, degrees and minutes that did not match any voyage we had taken together. My throat tightened as I stared at the mark, the paper feeling thinner than memory. A car engine purred to life in the driveway, unfamiliar and early. I set the locket back onto the cloth, the weight of it sudden in my grip, and moved to the window. A dark sedan rolled to a stop, its engine cutting off with a final click. Brandon stepped out, his shoulders squared, his eyes scanning the house as if searching for something he could name. He knocked once, twice, then pushed the door open before I could answer. "Dad, you're up early," he said, his voice bright, too bright for the hour. I hoped we could talk before the day gets away from us. I swallowed, the locket still warm in my pocket. "Brandon, what brings you here at this hour?" I asked, trying to keep my tone even, the way I used to calm a nervous client at the shop. He stepped inside, glancing around as though measuring the space for a sale. "Mom's things are still everywhere," he said, his voice dropping. "I need to talk about the Sea Grace. I've got a line on a buyer, and the money could help Celeste get Maison Celeste off the ground. You know how much that launch means to her." My chest tightened. The boat was more than wood and varnish. It was the echo of her laughter, the scent of diesel and lake water that clung to her sweater after a day on the water. "She wanted me to keep it," I said, the words firmer than I felt. "Evelyn said the Sea Grace was yours, but she also said it was mine to look after while you found your way." He laughed, a short sound that held no humor. "Dad, you're stuck in the past. The world doesn't wait for sentiment. I've got investors waiting, and Celeste Designs need fabric, models, a showroom. $46,000 would clear the bridge loan and give us room to breathe." I felt the locket press against my thigh, a secret lump against my leg. "You haven't even looked at the papers," I said. "The boat isn't just an asset, it's a promise." He crossed his arms, his jaw tightening. "Promises don't pay bills. Mom left you the boat, sure, but she also left you the responsibility to make sure we're all taken care of. If you won't sell, I'll have to find another way." He paused, his gaze dropping to the pocket where the locket hid. "What's that you're carrying, Dad?" I froze, the sudden question sharp as a knife. "Just a piece of her jewelry," I replied, my voice flat, holding back further explanation. "I was simply cleaning." He took a step closer, his eyes narrowing. "It doesn't look like cleaning. It looks like you're holding on to something you don't want me to see." He reached out, his fingers brushing the fabric of my coat. "Allow me to see what you have there." I jerked back, the motion instinctive. "It is nothing, Brandon, merely a personal keepsake." My heart hammered, not from fear but from the violation of his unexpected intrusion. I could feel the old wood of the floor beneath my shoes, the slight creak as I shifted my weight, the faint smell of lemon polish from the sideboard where Evelyn had kept her cherished silver. He lowered his hand, his expression shifting from outright demand to something akin to disappointment. "You have always been rather secretive about her personal effects," he commented. "However, this is not about mere nostalgia. This is about our very survival. If you refuse to assist, I will be compelled to consult a lawyer regarding the estate. Mother's will certainly left you the boat, but it did not grant you the right to prevent us from using its inherent value." He turned toward the door, his hand on the knob. "Think about it. We need that money, Dad. For Celeste. For the baby on the way." He hesitated, then added, "I'll be back later. Don't make me wait for my next visit." The door clicked shut behind him, the sound final. I stood alone in the foyer, the silence pressing in louder than before. I pulled the locket from my pocket, flipped it open again, and studied the strange coordinates. They pointed to a spot offshore, just beyond the harbor breakwater, where the charts showed nothing but depth. A thought flickered, half-formed, like a fish darting just beneath the surface. Why would she mark a place that held no anchorage, no reef, no known wreck? My fingers traced the numbers, the paper rough under my thumb. The house seemed to hold its breath, the clocks ticking, the only sound marking the seconds. I walked to the kitchen, poured a glass of water, and set it on the counter. The glass felt heavy, the liquid cool against my skin. I looked out at the empty dock. The boat slips vacant, the sea a flat sheet of gray under the morning sky. Somewhere beyond the breakwater, a secret lay waiting, tied to the woman who had taught me how to read the wind and the waves. I wondered if the answer would bring peace or pull me deeper into a current I could not see. I set the locket back onto the nightstand, the brass catching the light one last time before I drew the curtain. The day would come soon enough, when I would have to decide whether to honor her memory by keeping the boat close, or to follow the mark she left and see what she had tried to protect. For now, the house held only the echo of his voice and the quiet promise of a mystery that refused to stay submerged. Dad, I need the money now. This is a once-in-a-lifetime chance for Celeste and me, Brandon repeated, his voice bright but edged with urgency, a familiar plea that had begun to grate. I stood in the foyer, the cool marble under my shoes, reminding me of the mornings Evelyn and I used to walk the dock together. The house felt too quiet, the absence of her laughter, a weight on my chest. I glanced at the sideboard where her silver still gleamed, each piece a silent witness to the years we had shared. Brandon, sit down, I said, gesturing to the worn armchair near the window. He hesitated, then lowered himself, his fingers tapping the armrest in a restless rhythm. I know you've been thinking about the boat, he began, leaning forward. Sea Grace means a lot to Mom, but we have bills piling up. Celeste's brand launch is next month, and we need funds for the trip to Paris to showcase the line. Without that exposure, Maison Celeste could stall before it even starts. His words flowed fast, each sentence peppered with names and aspirations that sounded rehearsed. I could hear the anxiety beneath the confidence, the way his eyes flicked to the door, as if expecting someone to interrupt. I remember when you asked for help with your first venture, I said, my tone measured. You borrowed $10,000 from me to buy equipment for that photography studio. You paid it back slowly, but the effort showed me you were serious then. He blinked, a flash of surprise crossing his face before he composed himself. That was different, Dad. This is bigger. Celeste believes in her vision, and I believe in her. If we miss this window, we might never get another chance. I felt the familiar tug of responsibility, the desire to support my son, yet the boat was more than wood and fiberglass. It held Evelyn's promise, the quiet assurance she had given me on her sickbed. The boat isn't just an asset, I replied, choosing my words carefully. It's a promise she made to me, to keep it safe for the family. She said it would be a refuge, a place of peace. He crossed his arms, his jaw tightening. Promises don't pay bills, Dad. Mom left you the boat, sure, but she also left you with a family to care for. If you won't sell, I'll find another way. His gaze dropped to the pocket of my coat, where I kept Evelyn's locket, a small brass piece bearing the coordinates she had etched. What's in there, Dad? I felt the familiar press against my thigh, a secret lump that reminded me of her lingering mystery. What's that you're carrying? He asked, his voice sharp as a knife, a sudden inquiry that sliced through the composed atmosphere I had sought to maintain. Just a piece of her jewelry, I replied, my voice flat, offering a worn excuse. I was cleaning. He stepped closer, his eyes narrowing. That does not appear to be merely cleaning. It seems more like you are concealing something. He reached out, his fingers brushing the fabric of my coat. Let me see it. I jerked back, the motion instinctive. It's nothing, Brandon. Just a keepsake. My heart hammered, not from fear, but violated by his intrusion. I could feel the old wood of the floor beneath my shoes, the slight creak as I shifted my weight, the faint smell of polish from the sideboard where Evelyn kept her silver. He lowered his hand, his expression shifting from demand to something like disappointment. You've always been quiet about her things, he said, but this isn't about nostalgia. It's about survival. If you won't help, I'll have to talk to a lawyer. Mom's will left you the boat, but it didn't say you could block us from using its value. He turned toward the door, his hand on the knob. Think about it. We need that money, Dad. For Celeste. For the baby on the way. He hesitated, then added, I'll be back later. Don't make me wait. The door latched closed behind him, the noise definitive. I remained alone in the foyer, the quiet pressing harder than earlier. I drew the locket from my pocket, opened it once more, and examined the odd coordinates. They indicated a location offshore, past the harbor breakwater, where the maps displayed only depth. A perplexing thought flickered, half-formed, like a fish darting just beneath the surface. Why would she mark a place that held no anchorage, no reef, no known wreck? My fingertips followed the digits, the paper feeling coarse beneath my thumb. The house appeared to hold its breath. The clock's tick, the sole sound counting the seconds. I went to the kitchen, poured a glass of water, and placed it on the counter. The glass seemed weighty, the liquid chill against my skin. I gazed out at the vacant dock, the boat slips empty, the sea a level gray sheet beneath the morning sky. Beyond the breakwater, a secret waited, linked to the woman who had shown me how to read wind and waves. I returned the locket to the nightstand, the brass catching the light one final time before I pulled the curtain. Soon the day would arrive when I must choose between honoring her memory by keeping the boat near or following the mark she left to see what she attempted to safeguard. For the moment, the house retained only the echo of his voice and the quiet promise of a mystery that would not stay underwater. The phone shrilled against the wooden table, jerking me from my thoughts. I gripped the receiver, heart hammering as a strained voice crackled through the line. "Mr. Sterling? This is Lucas Reed. I just bought the Sea Grace from your son." I swallowed, the wood of the table biting into my palm. "You have the wrong number," I said, voice flat. "No, sir. I have the papers. I bought it for $46,000. My daughter Lily fell overboard yesterday. Something on the boat activated, a puff of air and a light, and she floated safely on a red life preserver. I owe you an explanation." My breath caught. The name Lily sparked a flash of the locket's hidden coordinates, the offshore mark Evelyn had etched. I forced my voice steady. "Explain what you mean by activated?" I asked, keeping my tone even. "There's a system on board," Lucas replied. His words rushed. "It sensed her hitting the water and deployed a flotation device. I've never seen anything like it. It just worked." A knot twisted in my stomach. Evelyn had spoken of a secret project, but she never mentioned a device that could save a life. "Did she tell you about it?" I pressed, fingers tightening around the receiver. "No, sir. I only found it after the incident. I thought you should know, given your connection to the vessel." Silence stretched. The only sound, the faint hum of the refrigerator behind me. I could feel the old wood floor vibrating under my shoes, a reminder of the house's age. "Tell me what you saw," I said, my voice low. The water roiled where she fell. Then a sudden puff of silvery mist rose from the deck, and a bright beacon flashed 3 times. The life jacket inflated on its own, lifting her to the surface. I pulled her aboard, shivering but alive. I pictured Evelyn's sketches, the strange symbols in her notebook, the whispered conversations she had with strangers at the marina. The pieces were snapping together, though the picture remained foggy. "You're certain it came from the boat?" I asked, trying to keep the tremor out of my words. "Absolutely," Lucas said. "I checked every inch. Nothing else could have done it. It was intentional." A sudden rap on the back door made me jump. I glanced toward the kitchen, the paint O-chip door trembling as if someone had tapped it lightly. "Someone's at the door," I murmured, more to myself than to him. "Should I call back later?" Lucas asked, concern threading his tone. "Hold on," I replied, setting the receiver down gently. I moved toward the door, the floorboards sighing under my weight. I cracked it open just enough to see a familiar silhouette. Brandon stood there, his coat damp from the morning mist, eyes darting between my face and the sea beyond. "Dad," he began, voice tight. "I need to talk." I stepped back, letting him enter, and closed the door behind him. The smell of salt and old pine filled the foyer. "You sold the boat," I said, keeping my gaze steady. He shifted his weight, hands shoved deep into his pockets. "I had to. Celeste needed the money for her line, for the trip to Paris. You left me no choice." His words rang hollow, echoing the argument we'd just had. I could see the tension in his jaw, the way his fingers tapped a restless rhythm against his thigh. "Did you know about the device?" I asked, leaning against the wall. He frowned, brow nodding. "What device?" "The one that saved Lily." He laughed, a short, bitter sound. You're talking nonsense. It's just an old boat. Nothing special. I pushed off the wall, closing the distance between us. Evelyn left something behind. Something you overlooked. His eyes flickered to the locket peeking from my coat pocket, the brass catching the hallway light. He swallowed, then stepped back. I don't know what you're talking about, he said, voice softer now. I just wanted to help Celeste. I thought selling the boat would fix everything. It fixed nothing, I replied, feeling the old anger rise like tide. It only buried what she tried to protect. He opened his mouth to retort, but a sudden knock on the front door cut him off. Both of us turned toward the sound. I moved to answer, my hand trembling slightly on the knob. The door swung open to reveal a woman in a navy coat, her hair tucked under a wool cap, a satchel slung over her shoulder. Good morning, she said, smiling politely. I'm Marla Evans from the Maritime Safety Board. We received a report about an unusual activation on a vessel named Sea Grace. May I come in? I glanced at Brandon, whose face had gone ashen. I swallowed, feeling the weight of the moment settle like fog over the harbor. Please, I said, stepping aside. Marla entered, her shoes whispering on the polished floor. She set her satchel down, pulling out a thin folder. I understand there was an incident yesterday, involving a child falling overboard, she began, eyes flicking to Lucas's name on the caller ID, still visible on my phone screen. We have reason to believe a safety system deployed automatically. Brandon opened his mouth, but I raised a hand, silencing him. Can you show us the data? I asked, my voice steady despite the pounding in my chest. She nodded, sliding a laminated sheet across the table. The diagram showed a schematic of a sensor array, a pressure switch, and a gas canister labeled inflation agent. My throat tightened. Evelyn's sketches matched almost exactly, down to the annotation about a secondary buoyancy trigger. Did she ever mention this to you? Marla asked, looking between Brandon and me. He stared at the paper, his jaw working. No, he finally whispered. I never saw anything like that. I felt a surge of vindication mixed with sorrow. Evelyn had hidden her work well, even from the man who should have known her best. Marla folded the sheet, her expression professional. We'll need to run a full inspection. If the system is functional, it could be a lifesaver for many vessels. I nodded, grateful for the validation. Thank you, I said. I'll cooperate fully. She smiled faintly. Thank you for coming forward. As she turned to leave, Brandon grabbed my arm, his grip painful. Dad, we need to talk about the money, he hissed, eyes darting to the retreating figure of Marla. I wrenched free, my voice low but firm. The money is irrelevant now. What matters is what Evelyn tried to protect. He stared at me, confusion warring with anger. You're choosing a dead woman's fantasy over your own family's future, he snapped. I met his gaze, feeling the old wood beneath my feet vibrate with the hum of the house, the sea beyond whispering secrets. The future she wanted was one where no child drowned silently, I replied. He let go, stepping back as if burned. Then you'll regret this, he muttered, turning toward the door. I watched him leave, the door clicking shut behind him. The house fell silent again, save for the distant cry of gulls. I returned to the phone, picking up the receiver. Lucas's voice was still on the line, waiting. Thank you for telling me, I said, my tone softer now. Anything I can do to help? He asked. I thought of the sketches, the USB, the hidden coordinates, the life preserver that had saved a child. Keep the boat safe, I replied. And if you ever need to talk about what she built, I'm here. He hesitated, then said, I will. The line went dead. I set the receiver down, my hand lingering on the cool plastic. A sudden thump came from the attic above, the sound of something heavy shifting. I froze, heart hammering again. The attic door, usually latched tight, creaked open a fraction, a thin slab of dusty light spilling onto the hallway floor. I stared at the opening, the air cool and stale, and felt a prickle at the back of my neck. Somewhere above, a box had moved. The morning light filtered through the mist over the harbor, painting the water in soft shades of gray and gold. I stepped onto the wooden pier, the familiar creak of the planks under my boots, reminding me of countless mornings spent with Evelyn, checking lines and checking the sky. Lucas stood near the side of Sea Grace, his hands resting on the rail, while Lily clung to his leg, her small fingers gripping the worn rope. She looked up at me with wide eyes, the red life preserver she wore bright against her coat. "Good morning, Mr. Sterling," Lucas said, his voice steady and calm. "Thank you for coming. I thought you might want to see the boat up close." I nodded, feeling the weight of the morning settle on my shoulders. "Good morning, Lucas. Lily, how are you feeling today?" She shifted her weight, her cheeks flushed from the cool air. "I'm okay. The boat is big. I liked the floaty thing." She patted the life preserver with a proud smile. Lucas smiled back, his eyes kind. "She's brave. She didn't panic when she went in." That device worked just as Evelyn hoped. I moved closer to the cabin door, running my hand along the smooth wood. A faint scratch near the hatch caught my attention, a mark I had seen Evelyn make years ago when she would hide small trinkets for me to find during our trips. "Did you notice this?" I asked, pointing to the faint groove. Lucas leaned in, his brow furrowed. "I saw it when I first came aboard. I thought it was just a scratch from the dock." "What do you think it is?" I crouched, feeling the wood with my fingertips. Evelyn used to make little secret spots. She'd say a sailor always needs a place to keep his thoughts safe. I pressed gently, and the wood gave a soft click, revealing a narrow slit. "It's a hidden compartment," Lucas whispered, his voice tinged with awe. She was always thinking ahead. I slid my fingers into the gap and felt a cool metal edge. With a steady pull, a small metal door swung inward, revealing a dark space inside. The scent of oil and old paper drifted out, mingling with the salty air. Inside lay a small metal box, its surface dulled by time. Beside it lay a bundle of hand-drawn sketches, their edges softened by age, and a thin stack of papers fastened with a rusted clip. A tiny USB drive nestled among them, its plastic casing scratched. I lifted the box carefully, feeling its weight. "This is her work," I said, my voice low. "She kept it hidden from everyone." Lucas peered over my shoulder, his expression earnest. "What does it do?" he asked, pointing to the sketches. I unfolded one of the drawings, the lines precise, the notes in Evelyn's neat script. "It's a sensor array," I explained, tracing a line with my finger. "It detects pressure changes in the water, triggers a gas release, and inflates a buoy." She called it second breath. Lily tugged at my sleeve, her voice bright. "Did it save me?" she asked, eyes wide. I knelt to her level, meeting her gaze. "It did, sweetheart. It kept you afloat until help arrived." Lucas placed a hand on my shoulder, his grip firm but gentle. "We need to keep this safe. If anyone else knew about it, they might try to take it for profit." I nodded, feeling a mix of pride and sorrow. Evelyn never wanted this to be a secret for profit. She wanted it to save lives. She looked at me, her smile soft. She always said the sea gives and takes. She wanted to give back. I slipped the USB into my pocket, the metal box feeling heavy in my hand. "Let's take a look at the papers," I said, spreading them on the nearby hatch cover. The sketches showed multiple sensors placed along the hull, each linked to a central valve. Notes in the margins talked about buoyancy thresholds and fail-you-safe safeties. The papers were a preliminary patent filing, the heading reading, Maritime Safety Activation System, Provisional Application. The date was written out in full, 2022, month 10, day 15. Lucas read over my shoulder, his voice calm. "This is solid work." She had everything mapped out. I felt a lump rise in my throat. She never told me about this. She kept it close, even from me. I watched Lily bounce on the balls of her feet, her excitement palpable. "Can we see it work?" she asked, pointing to the water lapping at the hull. I smiled, despite the ache in my chest. "Maybe later. First, we need to make sure it's safe to handle." Lucas nodded. "I'll run a quick check on the pressure lines. Nothing should be compromised." He moved to the side of the boat, pulling out a small gauge from his bag. I watched as he attached it to a valve, his movements precise and sure. The gauge needle steadied at a steady reading. "Looks good," he said, lowering the gauge. "The system holds pressure. If it ever needs to fire, it should work just as she designed." I exhaled, the tension in my shoulders easing a fraction. "Thank you, Lucas, for checking this, for keeping her work alive." He shrugged modestly. "I'm just glad I could help. Lily's safety means everything to me." Lily suddenly tugged at Lucas's hand, her face turning serious. "Mr. Sterling, Can I keep the floaty? It's my favorite. I chuckled, the sound soft and warm. Of course, you can keep it. It's yours now. She beamed, hugging the life preserver tighter. Thank you. As we stood there, the sun climbed higher, burning away the mist and turning the harbor water to a bright blue. I felt the weight of the metal box in my hand, a tangible piece of Evelyn's mind, and a quiet resolve began to form. Lucas glanced at his watch, though I knew he meant the time of day, and spoke again. We should head back to shore soon. The tide will turn soon, and I want to make sure the boat is secure for the night. I agreed, feeling the pull of responsibility. Let's secure everything first. I'll close the compartment, and we'll make sure nothing shifts. We worked together, Lucas tightening the straps on the life jackets, I carefully closing the metal door and ensuring the latch clicked into place. Lily helped by handing us a rag to wipe away any salt spray that had settled on the deck. When the latch sealed with a soft click, I stepped back, feeling a faint vibration through the wood, as if the boat itself acknowledged the closure. Everything looks tight, Lucas said, wiping his hands on his pants. Ready to go? I nodded, feeling the weight of the box against my thigh. Yes. Let's head in. We turned toward the dock, the wooden planks creaking under our steps. Lily skipped ahead, her laughter light and bright, echoing off the water. As we reached the shore, I paused, looking back at Sea Grace bobbing gently in the harbor. A sudden clatter came from the direction of the cabin, a sharp metallic sound, like a tool slipping from a shelf. I turned my head, frowning slightly. Did you hear that? I asked, voice low. Lucas froze, his eyes narrowing. It sounded like something fell inside the cabin. I felt a prickle at the base of my skull. Stay here with Lily, I whispered, my hand instinctively moving to the brass knob of the cabin door. I pushed the door open, the interior dim and cool. The air smelled of oil and old wood, and scattered across the floor lay a few small tools, a wrench, a screwdriver, and a thin coil of copper wire that had slipped from its holder. The source of the noise was clear. The coil had unwound and fallen, its end catching on the edge of a toolbox. I breathed out, the tension easing. Just a loose coil, I muttered, more to myself than to anyone else. I reached down, coiled the wire neatly, and placed it back in the toolbox. As I straightened, a folded piece of paper caught my eye, tucked beneath the wrench. It was not one of Evelyn's sketches. It was a different sheet, the edges worn, the ink faded. I picked it up, turning it over in my hands. The handwriting was unfamiliar, yet the phrasing felt oddly familiar, a mixture of technical notes and personal reminders. My heart gave a small, sharp tug as I read the first line. If the sea takes what you love, let it give back what you need. The words echoed something Evelyn had once whispered to me during a stormy night, her voice low and steady against the roar of wind. I looked up, the cabin door still open, the sea beyond glittering under the midday sun. A sudden gust lifted a loose strand of hair from my forehead, and I felt, for a brief moment, as if the boat itself were breathing with me. I slipped the paper into my pocket beside the USB, closed the cabin door firmly, and rejoined Lucas and Lily on the dock. Everything all right? Lucas asked, noticing my pause. I forced a smile, the weight of the secret now heavier but also brighter. Just a loose piece of wire, all secure now. Lucas nodded, relief evident in his tone. Good. Let's get her tied up and head home. I'll make sure the lines are tight. We worked together, looping the thick ropes around the cleats, pulling them taut until the boat sat snug against the pier. Lily helped by passing us the loops, her small hands surprisingly strong. As the last knot tightened, a sharp cry rose from the water nearby, a gull swooping low, its wings cutting the air. The sound seemed to pull my thoughts back to the shore, to the house where Evelyn's photographs still hung on the walls, to the quiet evenings we spent talking about tides and stars. I glanced at Lily, who was now busy tying a bright ribbon around the handle of her life preserver, her tongue poking out in concentration. She looked up, grinning. Look, Mr. Sterling, I made it fancy, she exclaimed, holding up the decorated handle. I laughed, the sound warm and genuine. It looks perfect, Lily. You've got a real eye for detail. Lucas clapped a hand on my shoulder, his grip firm. You know, Evelyn would be proud of you both. She built this not just for safety, but for the people she loved. I nodded, feeling the truth of his words settle deep in my chest. She did, I said softly, and I intend to see her work live on. We turned to leave the dock, the sun now high, casting long shadows across the wooden planks. As we walked toward the parking lot, a sudden gust of wind lifted a loose piece of canvas from the boat's cover, sending it fluttering like a white sail across the water. I watched it dance, the canvas snapping against the wind, before settling gently on the surface, bobbing gently beside the hull. For a heartbeat, I thought I saw a flash of red beneath it, life-preserver fabric caught in the current. Then the wind carried it away, disappearing into the gleaming horizon. The moment lingered, a quiet promise hanging in the salty air, and I felt, with a certainty that settled like an anchor, that whatever came next would carry Evelyn's spirit forward, just as she had intended. 2 days after the quiet promise on the dock, I found myself back in the study, the USB warm in my palm. The afternoon light slanted through the blinds, casting long stripes across the desk where Evelyn's sketches lay scattered. I swallowed, feeling the weight of the tiny metal drive as if it were a secret heartbeat. I set the USB beside the laptop and pressed the power button. The machine hummed to life, its fan a soft whisper that reminded me of the sea breeze we used to chase on weekends. I opened the folder labeled Second Breath. Inside lay neat subfolders, designs, tests, correspondence, and a single audio file titled, For Arthur. My cursor hovered over it, and I thought of the night she had whispered those words about the sea giving back what we need. I double-clicked, and her voice filled the room, soft yet steady, as if she were sitting beside me in the old armchair. Arthur, my love, if you are hearing this, then you have found the hidden compartment. I wanted you to know the truth about Second Breath. Not because I doubted your love, but because I knew you would want to protect it in your own way. I kept this work from you, not out of mistrust, but because I feared you would try to keep it locked away, a private treasure, instead of letting it serve the world. Her tone was warm, maternal, yet edged with resolve. I felt a lump rise in my throat, but I forced myself to listen. The system you saw activate on Sea Grace is the culmination of years of late nights, of sketches drawn on napkins, of endless tests in the garage. It does not need a button to work. It senses a person overboard and deploys flotation while sending a distress signal. I built it to save strangers, not to earn a prize. I pictured her hunched over a workbench, hair tucked behind her ears, soldering wires with careful hands. The memory brought a sting behind my eyes, but I refused to let it break me. There was an offer, Arthur. A company wanted to buy the patent for $4,800,000. They promised fast money, wide distribution. I refused. They wanted exclusive rights, the power to set the price as they pleased, to sell it at a cut-throat rate that would keep it out of reach of the very people who needed it most. I could not let my life's work become a tool for profit alone. I imagined the contract lying on the table, the numbers glaring, and her pen crossing it out with a firm line. My hands clenched the armrest of the chair, nails digging into the fabric. I left everything in the care of lawyer A. Henderson. He holds the papers that transfer the development rights to the Evelyn Sterling Maritime Safety Fund. You are named as the fund's representative. That means the technology belongs to the mission, not to any one person. If Brandon ever tries to claim ownership, the documents will show he never held the patent. A spark of hope flickered amid the sorrow. I leaned forward, elbows resting on the desk, and let her words settle like tide-worn stone. My final request is simple. Should Brendan sell Sea Grace, do not spend the money trying to buy it back to preserve a memory. Use those funds to launch Second Breath into production, to get it onto every fishing boat, every pleasure craft, every ferry that sails our coasts. That is the true legacy I wish to leave. Not a boat tied to a dock, but a promise that keeps families whole. Her voice softened on the last sentence, and I could almost hear her smile. I love you, Arthur. Live for the future we built together. The recording ended with a faint click, leaving the study filled with the quiet hum of the laptop and the echo of her love. I sat motionless, tears tracing hot paths down my cheeks, yet a strange steadiness grew in my chest. I reached for the drawer and pulled out a thick envelope marked with the lawyer's name. Inside lay the signed transfer document, the patent application, and a copy of the refusal letter to the company offering $4,800,000. Each page bore Evelyn's precise handwriting, her signature a flourish of confidence. I stood, paced to the window, and watched the gulls wheel over the harbor. The sea stretched endless, bright under the late afternoon sun. I felt the pull of two currents, one dragging me back to grief, the other urging me forward toward purpose. My phone buzzed on the desk. I glanced at the screen, Lucas Reed's name glowing. I hesitated, then answered. "Lucas, it's Arthur," I said, voice thick but clear. "Arthur, good to hear from you. Is everything all right?" His tone held concern, the kind of a man who had just witnessed a miracle. "I need to talk to you about something Evelyn left behind," I replied. "She recorded a message for me. It explains why she built Second Breath and what she wants done with the boat's proceeds." There was a pause, then his voice softened. "I'm listening." I took a breath, choosing my words carefully. "She refused a offer of $4,800,000 because she did not want the technology locked behind a paywall. She left the rights to a safety fund, with me as its representative. She said if Brandon sells Sea Grace, I should not try to buy it back. I should use the money to get Second Breath into production." Lucas was silent for a moment, then spoke. That makes sense. The device saved Lily. If we can put it on more boats, we could spare other families the terror we felt." I felt a surge of relief. "Exactly. I have the papers here. I want to meet you at the marina tomorrow, bring the documents, and we can start figuring out how to move forward. Perhaps we can use Sea Grace as a test bed, honor her work, and keep her spirit alive on the water." "I'll be there," he said. "And Arthur, thank you for trusting me with this." "Thank you, Lucas," I said, "for believing in her vision." We ended the call, and I placed the phone back down. The study felt less like a tomb of memories and more like a workshop of possibility. I opened the designs folder again, scrolling through Evelyn's neat schematics, each line a testament to her ingenuity. I traced a finger over the diagram of the activation sensor, imagining the moment it had flicked on for Lily, the way it had flung a red life preserver into the waves and summoned help. A thought struck me, sharp and bright as a flare. I should have paid attention to what she said next in the recording. I did not. I had been caught up in the emotion of her voice, missing the detail about the legal timeline she mentioned, how the fund needed to be activated within 6 months of the boat's sale, or the rights could revert. I frowned, realizing the urgency of our task. I pulled out my notebook and began to list steps. Contact lawyer Henderson, verify the fund's status, draft a proposal for marine safety boards, arrange a demonstration on Sea Grace, and reach out to local fishermen who might benefit from early units. Each item felt like a stone laid on a path toward a goal larger than myself. The sun dipped lower, casting gold ripples across the water. I closed the laptop, gathered the papers, and slipped them into my briefcase. As I rose, the chair creaked softly, a reminder of the hours she had spent here, sketching dreams that now called to be realized. I walked downstairs, paused at the foyer, and glanced at the photograph of Evelyn and me on our wedding day, her smile radiant, my hand resting on the rail of Sea Grace in the background. I touched the glass frame gently, feeling the smooth surface beneath my fingertips. "I will finish what you started," I whispered to the silent room. "I will make sure your gift reaches those who need it." The house remained quiet, but the air felt charged with purpose. I stepped outside, the evening breeze brushing my cheeks, and headed toward my car, the weight of the USB exchanged for the weight of a promise fulfilled. A soft chime came from my phone as I walked into the kitchen, the screen lighting up with a notification from a picture-sharing app. I glanced at the screen and saw Celeste posing beside a marble fountain, a glass of champagne lifted to her lips, the background filled with palm trees, and a bright blue sky that screamed Las Vegas, despite the caption claiming Paris. The image was bright. The filter gave her skin a glow that looked expensive, and the caption read, "Living my best life, thanks to the love that makes every trip possible." I felt a twinge of something I could not name, a mixture of curiosity and unease, as I set the phone down and moved to the coffee maker. The machine gurgled as it heated water, the scent of dark roast filling the air. I poured myself a cup, the ceramic warm against my palms, and stepped onto the balcony that overlooked the quiet street. Below, a gardener trimmed hedges with steady snips, the sound rhythmic and calm. I sipped the coffee, letting the bitterness wake my thoughts, and thought about the last time I had seen Celeste in person, her smile tight, her eyes darting to her phone every few seconds. My phone buzzed again, this time a call from Brandon. I answered, his voice bright but edged with urgency. "Dad, I need the money now. This is a once-in-a-lifetime chance for Celeste and me," Brandon said, his tone trying to sound confident but tinged with anxiety. I frowned, the coffee cup pausing halfway to my lips. "What exactly do you need it for?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. "The Paris trip and the launch for her brand," Brandon replied. "Maison Celeste is finally ready to take off. We need the cash to pay for the showroom, the models, the advertising. If we miss this window, everything falls apart." I set the cup down on the rail, the ceramic making a soft clink. "You sold the Seagrace for $46,000. Is that enough?" I asked, trying to keep any accusation out of my tone. "It should be," Brandon said, his voice a little louder now. "Celeste has already booked the flights, the hotel, the venue. She's been working nonstop. I just need to make sure the funds clear in time for the deposits." I heard a faint rustle in the background, perhaps papers shuffling. "Tell Celeste I hope the trip goes well," I said, choosing my words carefully. "And remind her that a launch built on borrowed time can feel hollow if the foundation is shaky." There was a pause, then Brandon laughed, a short, nervous sound. "You always worry too much, Dad. Trust me, we've got this under control." The line went dead. I stared at the blank screen, the coffee now lukewarm against my palm. I turned and walked back inside, the cool tiles sending a faint shiver up my soles. On the counter lay a stack of glossy magazines, their covers flashing celebrity faces and bold headlines. I picked one up, flipping to a page where a model wore a gown labeled with a brand I did not recognize. The article praised the designer's vision, the complex beadwork, the way the fabric caught the light. I could almost hear the rustle of silk, the flash of cameras, the murmured approval of the crowd. My thoughts drifted to the last time Celeste had visited our house, months ago before Evelyn's passing. She had arrived with a suitcase full of designer bags, her laughter bright as she showed me a scarf she claimed was silk from a boutique in Milan. She had twirled in front of the mirror, the fabric swirling around her, and said, "This is the kind of piece that makes you feel like you belong somewhere special." I had smiled then, noting the way her eyes lit up when she talked about fashion, the way she seemed to measure her worth by the labels she wore. Now, seeing her image on that screen, I wondered if the same spark still lived behind the curated smile. The phone vibrated again, a message notification flashing across the lock screen. I hesitated, then opened it. The text was from an unknown number, simple and direct. "Check your accounts. Something's off." My stomach tightened. I tucked the phone into my pocket and headed for the study, the wooden floor creaking under each step. Inside, the room smelled of old paper and cedar, the scent of Evelyn's lingering presence, mingling with the faint aroma of pipe tobacco that still clung to the shelves. I switched on the lamp, the warm glow spilling over the desk where the USB drive lay beside a notebook filled with her neat script. I opened the laptop, the screen lighting with a soft hum, and navigated to the photo-sharing app again. Celeste's latest story showed her sitting at a blackjack table, chips stacked high, a cocktail with a tiny umbrella perched on the rim. She laughed, throwing her head back, the sound bright but somehow hollow in the recording. I felt a knot tighten in my chest, not from jealousy but from concern. I remembered the way Evelyn used to say, "True worth is not measured in what you wear, but in what you give." I wondered if Celeste had heard those words, or if they had been drowned out by the clang of slot machines and the flash of camera bulbs. My phone buzzed again, this time a call from an unknown number. I answered, wary. "Hello?" I said, my voice cautious. "Is this Mr. Sterling?" A woman's voice asked, polished and confident. "Yes," I replied. "Who is this?" "This is Marissa Lowe. I work with Celeste on her brand's public relations. I wanted to discuss a potential issue with the upcoming launch payment. The vendor for the venue has not received the deposit we promised, and they are threatening to pull out unless we settle within 24 hours. She paused, listening to something on her end. "Celeste asked me to reach out to you, because she knows you handled the boat sale funds." I felt a flash of surprise, then a sudden rush of responsibility. I sent the money to Brandon's account as agreed. I have no control over what happens after it leaves my hands. I kept my tone even, trying not to let irritation creep in. I understand, Marissa said. But Celeste is worried the delay could damage her reputation. She asked if there was any way to expedite a transfer from your side. I glanced at the USB drive, at the notebook where Evelyn's plans lay outlined in careful ink. I will look into what I can do, I said. Please have Celeste call me directly if she needs to discuss anything further. Will do, Marissa replied, and the line went dead. I set the phone down, the weight of the conversation settling like dust on the desk. I opened the notebook again, flipping to a page where Evelyn had sketched a flowchart for the second breath prototype, each step labeled with precise measurements and notes about buoyancy sensors. The lines were neat, the logic clear. I traced a finger over the diagram, feeling the ridges of the paper under my fingertip, and thought about how she had turned a simple idea into a lifeline for strangers. A soft knock came at the door. I looked up to see Lucas standing in the hallway, his expression calm, his hands resting lightly on the doorframe. May I come in? He asked, his voice low and steady. Of course, I said, gesturing to the chair opposite the desk. He stepped inside, closing the door gently behind him. The room seemed to shrink a fraction as he settled, his presence grounding the scattered thoughts swirling in my mind. I heard about the call from Marissa, Lucas said, his eyes meeting mine. Celeste's team is scrambling. I can help if you need to move money quickly. I shook my head slightly. The funds are already transferred. I cannot access Brandon's account without his permission. He nodded, thoughtful. Then, perhaps we should talk to Brandon together. Make sure he understands the urgency. I considered his suggestion, the idea of confronting my son uncomfortable but necessary. All right, I said. Let's do that tomorrow morning. In the meantime, I want to make sure Celeste knows the money is meant for the trip and the launch, nothing else. Lucas smiled faintly. I'll relay that. And if there's anything else you need from me, just say the word. He rose, paused at the door, and looked back at me one last time. Your wife's work matters. I'll do what I can to honor it. Then he left, the door clicking shut softly. I stayed seated, the silence of the room pressing in. I thought about the upcoming confrontation, about the flutter of anxiety I saw in Celeste's eyes in those pictures, about the way she clung to symbols of wealth to feel secure. I felt a pang of sorrow, not for the money but for the void she seemed to be trying to fill with glitter and applause. I stood, walked to the window, and pulled the curtain aside. The street below was quiet, a lone car passing slowly, its tires humming on the asphalt. A breeze stirred the leaves of the oak tree, sending a whisper of sound through the glass. I inhaled, the air cool and faintly scented with distant rain, and let the moment settle. My phone vibrated once more, a reminder flashing on the screen. Meeting with Brandon, 10 a.m. I tapped it away, took a deep breath, and headed downstairs. The wooden stairs creaking under each step, each sound, a small reminder that the house still held echoes of laughter, of arguments, of quiet mornings with Evelyn's hand in mine. I moved toward the kitchen, ready to face whatever the day would bring. The weight of the USB drive in my pocket, a steady promise that some things, once set in motion, could not be easily stopped. I slammed the fridge door shut and turned to face the hallway. The kettle whistled, pulling my attention to the stove. I lifted the lid, steam curling upward in a thin white ribbon. Dad, I need the money now, Brandon said, his voice bright but edged with urgency. He leaned against the doorway, hands shoved deep into his pockets. I set the lid down, the metal clack echoing in the quiet kitchen. What money are you talking about? I asked, keeping my tone level. He shifted his weight, eyes flicking to the window where the morning light painted the floor in pale gold. Celeste's brand launch needs cash. Paris trip too. I thought we could sell Seagrace. My breath caught, the air suddenly thick. I stared at the condensation on the glass, droplets tracing slow paths down the pane. You remember what Evelyn said about that boat? I said, fingers tightening around the edge of the counter. He let out a short laugh, the sound sharp and impatient. She's gone, Dad. We need to live in the now. The words landed like a stone, heavy and final. I felt the familiar tightness in my jaw, the one that always appeared when frustration rose. She told Brandon to keep it for me, I said, voice low but steady. He crossed his arms, the fabric of his shirt pulling tight across his chest. That was a sentimental gesture. The boat's just wood and fiberglass. I turned fully to face him, the cool tile grounding my bare feet. It's not sentimental. It's a promise. He sighed, the sound long and weary. Okay, let's say it is. What's the alternative? You want me to beg for a loan from the bank? That takes weeks. I glanced at the clock above the sink, its hands crawling toward 10. There's another way. He pushed off the doorway, stepping closer, the scent of his aftershave cutting through the kitchen air. Enlighten me. I hesitated, then chose my words carefully. Evelyn left me a USB. It holds the plans for Second Breath. If we develop it, we could fund everything without selling the boat. His eyebrows rose, skepticism flickering. You expect me to wait months for a prototype while Celeste's investors pull out? I shook my head, the motion small but deliberate. I've already spoken with Lucas Reed. He's willing to help move things forward. A flicker of surprise crossed his face, quickly masked by irritation. Lucas? He's just a boat owner. What does he know about tech startups? I kept my gaze steady, refusing to be drawn into his dismissal. He knows the sea. He knows what it means to lose a child to water. The mention of Lily seemed to soften his expression. Just a fraction. He rubbed the back of his neck, a habit I'd noticed when he was uneasy. All right, fine. Let's say we talk to him. But we still need cash now for the trip and the launch. I felt a pang of sorrow, not for the money, but for the way he reduced everything to figures. I'll look into what I can do. He nodded, the motion sharp. Please have Celeste call me directly if she needs to discuss anything further. I turned to the sink, running cool water over my hands. The sensation grounded, tactile sensation of the skin. He said his voice, but not idle. He handed me his phone as we stepped toward the living room, the floorboards creaking under our weight. The living room held the faint aroma of Evelyn's lavender sachet, still tucked inside the vase on the mantel. I paused, inhaling deeply, the scent both comforting and painful. Brandon followed, his steps softer now. Marissa, from Celeste's team, will handle the transfer, he said, his tone businesslike. I sat in the armchair, the fabric worn smooth at the elbows. The chair creaked as I settled, the sound familiar like an old friend. I'll make sure she knows the money is strictly for the trip and the launch, nothing else. He stood, pacing briefly, before stopping in front of the bookshelf. His fingers traced the spines of nautical manuals, a habit from his youth. If you change your mind about the boat, let me know. I watched him, noting the way his eyes darted to the window where the sea sparkled in the distance. The thought of sea grace slipping away made my stomach twist, a physical knot that tightened with each breath. He turned back, his expression unreadable. I'll be at the office until noon. Call if anything shifts. He moved toward the front door, the brass knob turning with a soft click. The door opened, letting in a rush of salty air mixed with the distant hum of traffic. He stepped onto the porch, pausing to look back. Take care of yourself, Dad. Then he was gone, the door closing gently behind him. The house fell silent except for the ticking of the wall clock, each tick a reminder of time marching forward. I remained in the chair, the USB drive heavy in my pocket. I thought about the notebook open on the desk, Evelyn's sketches of buoyancy sensors and flowcharts laid out in careful ink. I traced a finger over the diagram, feeling the ridges of the paper under my fingertip, recalling how she had turned a simple idea into a lifeline for strangers. A soft knock came at the door. I glanced up and saw Lucas standing in the hallway, his face calm, his hands resting lightly on the doorframe. May I come in? He asked, his voice low and steady. I gestured to the chair opposite the desk. He entered, shutting the door softly behind him. The room appeared to shrink slightly as he settled, his presence grounding the scattered thoughts whirling in my mind. I heard about the call from Marissa, Lucas said, his eyes meeting mine. Celeste's team is scrambling. I can assist if you need to transfer money swiftly. I shook my head slightly. The funds are already transferred. I am unable to reach Brandon's account without his permission. He nodded, thoughtful. Then perhaps we should talk to Brandon together. Make sure he understands the urgency. I considered his suggestion, the idea of confronting my son uncomfortable but necessary. All right, I said. Let's do that tomorrow morning. Meanwhile, I want to ensure Celeste understands the money is intended for the trip and the launch, and nothing more. Lucas smiled faintly. I'll relay that. And if you require anything further from me, simply speak the word. He rose, paused at the door, and looked back at me one last time. Your wife's work matters. I'll do what I can to honor it. Then he left, the door clicking shut softly. I remained seated, the room's silence pressing inward. I thought about the approaching confrontation, about the flutter of anxiety I noticed in Celeste's eyes in those photos, about how she clung to wealth symbols to feel safe. I felt a twinge of sorrow, not for the money, but for the emptiness she appeared to be filling with glitter and applause. I rose, walked to the window, and drew the curtain aside. The street below stayed quiet, a single car moving slowly, its tires humming on the asphalt. A breeze moved the leaves of the oak tree, sending a faint sound through the glass. I breathed in, the air cool and lightly scented with distant rain, and allowed the moment to settle. My phone vibrated again, a reminder flashing on the screen. Meeting with Brandon, 10 a.m. I tapped it away, drew a deep breath, and went downstairs, the wooden stairs creaking with each step, each sound a small reminder that the house still held echoes of laughter, of arguments, of quiet mornings with Evelyn's hand in mine. I went toward the kitchen, ready to face whatever the day might bring, the weight of the USB drive in my pocket a steady promise that some things, once set in motion, cannot be easily halted. I placed the USB on the counter beside the coffee maker, its metal surface cool to the touch. The morning light caught the etched letters, glinting faintly. I poured myself a cup of black coffee, the bitter aroma filling my nostrils. As I lifted the mug, a sudden crash echoed from the front hallway. I set the mug down, heart pounding, and rushed toward the source. The front door stood ajar, the lock mechanism twisted and broken. A figure stood in the doorway, shoulders hunched, a soaked coat dripping onto the polished wood. It was Lucas, his face pale, eyes wide. In his hand he clutched a waterlogged envelope, the seal broken, the paper inside stained and curling. "Arthur," he gasped, voice raw. "The Coast Guard just called. They found Sea Grace drifting off the coast near Catalina. No one aboard. They say the automatic deployment system didn't trigger." My breath vanished, the world narrowing to the sound of my own pulse in my ears. I stepped forward, hand outstretched, but stopped short as Lucas continued, his words tumbling out in a rush. "They're treating it as a possible malfunction. They want to see the logs from second breath. They think someone might have tampered with it." The words hit me like a physical blow, cold and sharp. I looked at the envelope, at the water staining the corners, at the name barely legible, Evelyn Sterling Maritime Safety Fund. The reality of the situation crashed over me, not as sadness but as a sharp, urgent clarity that something had gone terribly wrong with the very thing meant to protect. I tightened my grip on the doorframe, feeling the wood grain dig into my palm, and forced myself to speak. "Show me what they sent." Lucas handed over the envelope, the paper trembling in his grasp. I unfolded it slowly, the official letterhead of the United States Coast Guard visible at the top. The message was concise, demanding an immediate inspection of the vessel's safety systems and a full report on the activation history of the installed device. Below the text, a phone number and a case number were printed in stark black ink. I lowered the letter, my mind racing, the weight of responsibility settling like an anchor in my chest. I looked up at Lucas, whose expression mirrored my own mix of dread and determination. "We need to go to the dock," I said, voice low but firm. He nodded, wiping water from his sleeve. As we turned to leave, the phone on the counter buzzed again, this time displaying a name I had not expected to see. Brandon Sterling. I glanced at the screen, hesitated, then answered, bracing myself for whatever came next. A sudden buzz shook the phone in my hand as I stepped onto the porch. The sound cut through the quiet morning like a sharp knock. I glanced at the screen and saw Brandon's name flashing. I swallowed, feeling the familiar knot tighten in my chest, and slid my thumb across the glass to answer. "Arthur." His voice came through strained, edged with something I could not quite name. "We need to talk." I kept my voice steady, the words forming without hesitation. "What is it, Brandon?" He hesitated, then rushed on. "Mom's lawyer just called. He says the fund needs paperwork signed today. If we don't get it done, the whole thing could stall." I felt a flash of irritation, but I let it pass. I'm on my way to the dock with Lucas. We have to check the Coast Guard report about Sea Grace. His tone sharpened. You're wasting time on a boat when the fund needs you. Mom would have wanted the money secured first. I heard Lucas shift beside me, his boots scraping the wooden step. I could feel his gaze on me, waiting for my reply. I understand the fund is important, I said, but the safety device Mom built is part of that legacy. If it failed, we need to know why before we move any papers. A short laugh escaped him, bitter and quick. You always put sentiment before sense. Fine. Meet me at the lawyer's office after you're done with your little inspection. Bring the documents. I heard the line go dead. The line went silent, leaving only the hum of the line in my ear. I lowered the phone, feeling the weight of it against my palm. Lucas stepped closer, his voice low. He's trying to pressure you. We should go now, before he tries to intercept us. I nodded, tucking the phone into my coat pocket. The morning air felt crisp against my skin, carrying a faint hint of salt from the harbor. We walked down the gravel path toward his truck, the gravel crunching under our boots. As we reached the vehicle, I paused, feeling the cool metal of the door handle under my palm. I glanced back at the house, at the window where Evelyn's favorite curtain used to flutter. A sudden memory flashed, her laughing as she tied a rope to the mast, her eyes bright with excitement. I pushed the memory aside and climbed into the passenger seat. Lucas started the engine, the low rumble filling the cabin. He glanced at me, his expression earnest. You sure you want to do this? If the Coast Guard finds something wrong, it could delay everything. I turned my head to look out the windshield, the road stretching ahead gray and quiet. I need to know what happened. If the system failed, people could be hurt. Mom would never want that ignored. He nodded, his grip tightening on the wheel. Then we'll find out together. The drive to the dock took about 20 minutes. The landscape rolled past, rolling hills dotted with oak trees, the occasional flash of a distant sail on the horizon. My thoughts kept circling back to the phone call, to Brandon's urgency, to the fund's paperwork. I felt a tug of doubt, but I pushed it aside, focusing on the road. When we arrived, the dock buzzed with activity. Coast Guard officers moved with purpose, their uniforms crisp against the gray sky. A small cutter bobbed near the pier, its lights flashing intermittently. Lucas parked the truck, and we stepped out, the scent of diesel and seawater filling our nostrils. An officer approached, his badge gleaming. You must be Mr. Reed and Miss Sterling. I'm Officer Hale. We've got the vessel secured. The auto-deploy didn't fire, and we need to check the logs. I felt a surge of adrenaline, my heart pounding in my chest. Please, show us what you found. He led us to a small office on the pier, where a laptop sat open on a table. The screen displayed a series of timestamps and sensor readings. Officer Hale pointed at a gap in the data. Here, at 1432, the pressure sensor spiked, but the release valve never triggered. Something blocked the mechanism. Lucas leaned in, frowning. Could it be a mechanical failure? The officer shook his head. We're looking at a possible tampering. The housing shows signs of forced entry, scratches around the seal. My breath caught. The thought that someone might have interfered with Mom's invention sent a chill down my spine. I forced my voice to stay calm. Can we see the device? He nodded and gestured toward a covered crate nearby. We walked over, and he lifted the tarp to reveal a sleek, silver cylinder mounted on a bracket. Wires snaked from it to a control panel. I reached out, my fingers brushing the cool metal, feeling the faint vibration of the internal circuitry still humming. Lucas examined the housing closely. These marks look like someone used a screwdriver to pry it open. I swallowed hard. Who would want to sabotage it? Officer Hale looked at us, his expression grim. That's what we're trying to figure out. We'll need to run a full forensic check. Just then, my phone buzzed again. I glanced at the screen. Blaine's name glowed. I hesitated, then answered, keeping my voice even. Arthur? He sounded out of breath, as if he'd been running. You need to get back to the house now. Celeste just showed up with a lawyer. She's demanding we hand over the fund documents immediately. She says if we don't, she'll take legal action. My stomach dropped. What does she want? He paused, as if choosing his words carefully. She says the money belongs to her and Brandon. She's threatening to freeze the accounts if we don't comply. I felt the anger rise, hot and sharp, but I forced it down. Tell her I'll be there as soon as I can. I need to finish here first. He sighed. All right, but hurry. I ended the call and turned to Officer Hale. Is there anything else we need to see before we leave? He looked at the laptop, then at the device. We've taken photos and logged the anomaly. You can take the drive with the logs if you need them for your own review. I nodded, grateful. Thank you. Lucas placed a hand on my shoulder. Let's get this data back to the house. We'll need to show Brandon and Celeste exactly what we found. We walked back to the truck, the weight of the evidence feeling solid in my hands. As we drove away from the dock, the sun climbed higher, casting sharp shadows across the water. My mind raced with possibilities. Who could have wanted to disable the safety system? And why? Halfway back, the radio crackled with a news bulletin. A reporter's voice cut through the static, describing a recent boating accident nearby where a small vessel had capsized, but all passengers were rescued thanks to an automatic flotation device. The report mentioned that the device had been manufactured by a company linked to a marine safety fund. I sensed a tingling at the base of my skull. The coincidence felt too pointed to ignore. Lucas glanced at me, his brow furrowed. Did you hear that? I nodded, my voice low. It sounds like the same kind of tech Mom worked on. He slowed the truck as we approached a turn, the engine humming softly. If someone is a moment later, a sharp crack split the air. A gunshot echoed from the woods off the road, followed by the sound of shattering glass. I instinctively jerked the wheel, the vehicle swerving onto the shoulder. My heart slammed against my ribs as I stared toward the source of the noise. A plume of smoke rose from a small cabin tucked between the trees, its roof partially collapsed. Flames licked the edges of the broken windows, sending orange sparks into the sky. A figure stumbled out, clutching their arm, blood blooming dark against their shirt. I stared, breathless, as the realization struck. Someone had tried to destroy the evidence, and now they were trying to silence anyone who saw it. The truck's engine roared back to life as I slammed my foot on the brake, the vehicle lurching forward. I shouted over the noise, "Hold on!" Lucas gripped the wheel, eyes wide, as we barreled toward the smoke, the sirens in the distance growing louder. The world narrowed to the heat of the blaze, the scent of burnt wood, and the urgent need to reach whoever was hurt before the flames consumed everything. I wondered if the fire had already consumed the evidence. Lucas gripped the wheel tighter as the orange glow grew larger on the horizon, the crackle of flames reaching us even through the closed windows. A siren wailed in the distance, growing louder with each passing second. I pressed the accelerator, the truck surging forward, the smell of burnt pine filling my nostrils. Lucas shouted over the roar, "Hold on! We're almost there!" I glanced at him, his face illuminated by the flickering light, eyes narrowed against the smoke. "Someone set this on purpose," I said, voice low but steady. He nodded, jaw tight. Whoever it was wanted us to see the blaze. The truck lurched as we turned onto the narrow dirt road that led to the cabin. Smoke choked the air, making it hard to see beyond the immediate glow. A figure stumbled out of the burning doorway, clutching a bloodied arm, eyes wide with terror. I slammed the brakes, the vehicle skidding slightly on the gravel. Lucas threw the door open and rushed to the person. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice urgent but gentle. The stranger gasped. They set the fire. After I saw them tampering with the boat's sensor." I knelt beside the stranger, pulling a clean cloth from my pack and pressing it to the wound. Blood seeped through the fabric, dark and thick. "Who were they?" I asked, keeping my tone even. The stranger swallowed, eyes darting to the flames. "Two men. One wore a dark coat. The other had a scar on his left cheek. They said something about papers." Before I could ask more, a sudden crack echoed from the woods behind us, followed by a second shout. Lucas sprang to his feet, hand moving to the knife at his belt. "Stay behind me," he warned, eyes scanning the tree line. I rose, feeling the heat on my back, and stepped forward, shielding the injured stranger with my body. "Who are you working for?" I demanded. A voice, low and hoarse, replied from the shadows. "You know who we work for. Hand over the drive." I felt a surge of anger, but I kept my voice flat. "You won't get it." The figure stepped forward, the scar catching the firelight. A man I had seen briefly at the dock the day Lucas bought the Sea Grace. His companion lingered behind, hand resting on a holstered pistol. Lucas stepped forward, his own voice steady. "You don't want to start a fight. You can't finish." The scarred man laughed, a harsh sound that seemed to crackle with the flames. "You think a boat mechanic and a grieving widow can stop us?" I lifted my chin, refusing to show fear. "We already stopped you once." He lunged, but Lucas moved faster, grabbing the man's wrist and twisting. The pistol clattered to the ground, skidding into the dirt. I seized the moment, kicking the scarred man's knee. He stumbled, releasing his grip on the other man, who fumbled for his weapon. The second attacker fired a wild shot, the bullet striking the side of the cabin and sending a shower of splinters into the air. Lucas shouted, "Down!" and shoved me to the ground just as a second blast rang out, this time striking the tree beside us. Silence fell, broken only by the roar of the fire and the ragged breathing of the wounded stranger. The two attackers lay still, one motionless, the other groaning as he clutched his bleeding shoulder. I pushed myself up, heart pounding, and turned to the stranger. "Are you all right?" He nodded weakly. "Thanks. I saw them tampering with the pressure valve on the Sea Grace's safety system. They wanted it to fail." Lucas's eyes narrowed. "That explains why the valve didn't fire when Lily fell." I stared at the smoking wreckage, the truth settling like ash on my tongue. Someone had tried to kill the proof of Evelyn's work. I pulled out my phone, hands shaking not from fear but from resolve. I needed to speak with Attorney Henderson before anyone else could twist the story. I dialed his number, the line ringing twice before his calm voice answered. "Attorney Henderson, this is Arthur Sterling." "Arthur, I heard about the incident at the dock. Are you and Lucas safe?" "We're fine for now. There was an attempt to destroy evidence. I need to know what you told me about the offer Evelyn refused." His tone shifted to a more formal cadence. "Evelyn Sterling did receive a formal proposal for $4,800,000 for the exclusive rights to the Second Breath system. She declined it outright. Her letter of refusal, which you have on the USB, states she refused because the purchaser intended to mark up the technology and sell it at exorbitant prices, violating her intent to keep the life-saving device accessible." I swallowed, the words heavy. "And the legal transfer of rights to the Evelyn Sterling Maritime Safety Fund?" "Correct. She executed a transfer of all intellectual property rights to the fund, naming you as the representative. The document is notarized and filed with the state. No individual, including Brandon Sterling, holds any claim to the technology." A sudden crackle came from the line. Then a sharp voice interrupted. "This is Brandon Sterling. You have no right to keep what belongs to my mother." I pressed the phone closer, my voice even. "Your mother transferred those rights legally before she passed. You have no claim." He laughed, a bitter sound. "You think a piece of paper stops me? I'll see you in court." The line went dead. I stared at the screen, the call log flashing. Lucas placed a hand on my shoulder, his grip firm. "We need to get that data to the authorities before anyone else tries to silence us." I nodded, eyes scanning the burning cabin. The wounded stranger stirred, groaning as he tried to sit up. "Help me get him to the truck," I said. We lifted him together, his weight shifting against my chest as we moved toward the vehicle. The fire raged behind us, orange tongues licking the night sky, sending sparks drifting like dying stars. As we secured the stranger in the passenger seat, a thin envelope fluttered from the wreckage and landed at my feet. I picked it up, the paper rough under my fingertips. Inside was a single sheet of paper, the logo of a maritime law firm stamped in the corner, and a handwritten note that read, "Stop digging, or you'll regret it." My pulse quickened, but I kept my expression neutral. I slid the envelope into my pocket, turned to Lucas, and said, "We have what we need. Let's go." He started the engine, the truck rumbling to life as we pulled away from the blaze, the sickly glow fading in the rearview mirror. The road stretched ahead, dark and winding, but my mind was fixed on the next step, meeting with the authorities, presenting the evidence, and ensuring Evelyn's work would not be buried beneath lies and flames. Just as we merged onto the main highway, a dark sedan appeared in the distance, its headlights cutting through the night. It stayed a respectable distance behind, neither accelerating nor falling back. I glanced at Lucas, his jaw set, eyes fixed on the road ahead. The sedan stayed there, a silent shadow, as if waiting to see which turn we would take. "We need to get to the sheriff's office before dark," Lucas said, his eyes fixed on the rearview mirror. I nodded, feeling the weight of the envelope in my coat pocket. The sedan behind us kept a steady distance, its headlights barely cutting through the rain-slicked asphalt. My hands tightened on the wheel, knuckles whitening, as the wipers fought a steady stream. A flash of lightning illuminated the dark sedan's grille, revealing a darkened windshield with no visible driver. "Are they still back there?" Lucas asked, voice low. I glanced at the mirror again, the shape of the sedan lingering like a shadow. Yes, they haven't changed position. The road curved toward the county line, trees leaning close as if listening. My throat tightened, not from fear but from the resolve that had hardened since the cabin fire. "We'll hand the evidence to Sheriff Malone," I said, voice steady despite the pounding in my chest. "He'll know what to do with the documents and the threatening note." A sudden sputter from the engine made me glance down at the fuel gauge, the needle hovering near empty. "We should stop at the next town," Lucas suggested, tapping the brake lightly. I glanced at the fuel gauge again, the red warning light blinking. "There's a gas station just past the bend," I replied, pointing ahead with a chin lift. The sedan seemed to pause for a heartbeat, then accelerated slightly, closing the gap. My pulse quickened, but I kept my face neutral, focusing on the road ahead. We pulled into the dimly lit station, the fluorescent light buzzing overhead. I stepped out, the cold air biting my cheeks, and glanced back at the sedan. It idled at the pump opposite us, driver unseen behind a reflective windshield. I filled the tank, the pump clicking off as the gauge settled. While the fuel flowed, I slipped the envelope from my pocket and slipped it into the inner lining of my jacket, feeling the paper's roughness against my skin. Lucas finished pumping and joined me at the car door, his expression grim. "Do you think they'll try to stop us?" he asked. I met his gaze, seeing the same determination mirrored in his eyes. "If they do, we'll have the sheriff's deputies on our side soon enough." The sedan's engine revved softly, then it pulled away, merging onto the highway without a glance back. A breath I hadn't realized I was holding escaped my lips. We drove back onto the road, the rain easing to a mist. The county sheriff's office loomed ahead, a modest brick building with a flashing blue light. I parked the truck beside the cruiser, engine ticking as it cooled. Lucas and I stepped out, the envelope still secured against my chest. Inside, the air smelled of polished wood and stale coffee. Deputy Hale looked up from his desk, eyebrows rising as we approached. "Evening. Sheriff Malone isn't in tonight, but I can take your statement," he said, voice warm but cautious. I placed the envelope on his desk, sliding it forward. "We have evidence that someone tried to sabotage Evelyn Sterling's safety system on the Seagrace," I began, keeping my tone even. Inside the envelope were the threatened note, a copy of the Coast Guard letter, and a USB drive containing the device logs. Deputy Hale opened the envelope, his fingers tracing the handwriting. "Stop digging or you'll regret it," he read aloud, frowning. He inserted the USB into the port of his computer, the screen flickering to life with lines of data. "The pressure spike without valve activation matches tampering," he murmured, eyes scanning. I felt a surge of relief, mixed with lingering tension. "We also have a witness who saw two men tampering with the release valve before the fire," Lucas added, stepping forward. Deputy Hale nodded, his pen poised over a notepad. "We'll need to issue a warrant for a search of the property linked to the sedan's plate." I glanced at the window, seeing the sedan's dark shape disappear into the night down the road. A sudden knock on the office door made us all turn. Deputy Hale called out, "Come in." The door opened to reveal a young officer, drenched from the rain, holding a soaked notebook. "Sherpson just called in a possible break-in at the old boathouse on Miller Road," the officer reported, voice urgent. Deputy Hale exchanged a look with Lucas and me. "That's where the sedan was headed," Lucas said quietly. I felt my stomach tighten. The boathouse was where Evelyn had once stored spare parts for her prototypes. "We should go," I said, standing. Deputy Hale grabbed his radio, voice calm. "I'll send units. You three stay here until we clear the scene." He turned back to his desk, already typing a dispatch. The office lights hummed overhead as we waited, the rain tapping a steady rhythm against the windows. Minutes later, the radio crackled with an update. Officers had secured the boathouse, finding tools and a discarded marine battery consistent with the sabotage. No suspects were apprehended, but the evidence linked directly to the tampering we'd reported. Deputy Hale leaned back, exhaling slowly. "This looks like a coordinated effort to silence the project," he said. I nodded, feeling the weight of the evidence settle into purpose rather than fear. Lucas rested his palm on my shoulder, holding it tightly. "We'll keep pushing forward," he whispered. I looked out at the Reno-slicked lot, the sedan nowhere in sight. A thought formed, sharp and clear. If they wanted to stop us, they'd have to go through the law first. The office door opened again, and Sheriff Malone stepped in, his badge catching the fluorescent light. "What's the situation, Deputy?" he asked, voice authority laced with concern. Deputy Hale rose, handing over the USB and the note. "We have proof of tampering on the Seagrace safety system, a threatening note, and a vehicle linked to the suspects," he reported. Sheriff Malone frowned, studying the evidence. "We'll get a warrant for the registered owner of that sedan and bring them in for questioning," he declared. I felt a flicker of hope amidst the storm. After the sheriff left to make the calls, Deputy Hale turned to us. "You did the right thing bringing this to us," he said, sincere. "Now, we'll see where the trail leads." I thanked him, feeling the tension in my shoulders ease just a fraction. Lucas and I gathered our things, the evening air cooler, as we stepped back onto the wet pavement. The sedan was gone, but the memory of its lingering presence stayed like a chill. We walked to our truck, the engine humming softly as we turned the key. As we pulled away from the sheriff's lot, a sudden flash of lightning illuminated the rearview mirror, revealing a dark silhouette standing near the tree line, watching us go. My heart lurched, but I kept my eyes on the road, whispering to myself that the night was far from over. I slammed the office door shut and pressed the phone to my ear, heart pounding as the lawyer's voice came through the line. "Arthur, this is Henderson. I've reviewed the documents Evelyn left. The Maritime Safety Fund exists, and you are named as the representative. We need to file a short affidavit to activate the trust before any funds can be moved." I swallowed, the words feeling heavy in my throat. "What does that involve?" "Just a sworn statement, confirming your role and a copy of Evelyn's letter of intent. Once filed, the trust can receive donations and allocate funds for the safety project." I glanced at the framed photo of Evelyn on the desk, her smile soft against the sea background. "I'll do it. Send the paperwork. Already on its way to your email. Let me know if you need anything else." The line went dead. I set the phone down, the silence pressing against my ears. A soft knock pulled me from my thoughts. I turned to see Brandon standing in the doorway, his face tight, eyes darting to the floor. "Dad, we need to talk," he said, voice low but urgent. I gestured to the chair opposite me. "Sit." He sank into the seat, hands clasped tightly. "Celeste's launch is next week. She needs the money from the boat sale now, or the suppliers will pull out. The investors are getting nervous." I felt a tight knot in my stomach. "You sold Seagrace for $46,000. That money is already gone." He swallowed hard. "I know, but the accounts are frozen. The bank flagged the transfer because of the lawsuit rumors. We need cash fast, or we lose everything." His gaze flickered to the window, where the harbor lights flickered like distant stars. "I understand you're scared," I said, keeping my tone steady. "But selling the boat was never about the money for Evelyn. It was about keeping her work safe." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "She trusted me to keep it safe. I thought selling it would give us a fresh start. I didn't know about the fund." I let the silence sit for a breath, then spoke again. "The lawyer says we have to file a paper to unlock the trust. If we do, the money can go toward the safety tech, not toward a fashion show." His jaw tightened. "And what about Celeste? She's already booked the venue in New York. She'll lose her deposit if we pull out." I saw the fear in his eyes. The same fear I'd felt when Evelyn's illness took hold. "I won't let her dreams be built on a lie," I said softly. "But we can find another way. Maybe a small loan, or a partner who believes in the mission." He stared at his hands, then lifted his head. "What if we talk to that lawyer again? See if we can get an advance?" I shook my head. "The trust doesn't work like a bank account. The funds are earmarked for the project. Any advance would violate Evelyn's wishes." He stood abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor. "I have to tell Celeste. She won't take no for an answer." He turned and left, the door clicking shut behind him. Later that evening, I sat at the kitchen table, the laptop open to Evelyn's files. A soft chime from my email pulled my attention. I opened the message from Henderson and saw the affidavit attached. I printed it, signed my name at the bottom, and placed the envelope in the outgoing mail slot. The act felt like a small step toward honoring her promise. As I turned to leave the room, a faint creak came from the attic above. I paused, listening. The sound came again, a soft scrape like something being dragged across wood. My heart hammered. I crept to the foot of the stairs and peered up the narrow opening. A shadow moved near the old chest where Evelyn kept her sailing charts. I called out, "Who's there?" No answer came, only the creak of wood shifting again. I grabbed the flashlight from the hallway and stepped onto the first stair. The beam cut through the dust, revealing a glint of metal on the chest lid, a small lockpick, glinting faintly. Someone had been in there. My breath came short. I stepped back down, mind racing. Who would want those old papers? I hurried to the phone and dialed Lucas's number. "Lucas, it's Arthur. I think someone's been in the attic at my house." His voice came back calm, but concerned. "Stay where you are. I'm on my way." I hung up, the line going dead, and waited at the bottom of the stairs, ears straining for any sound. Minutes later, Lucas's car pulled up outside. He hurried to the door, his face set. "I brought a friend," he said, gesturing to a tall woman in a dark coat following him. "This is Mara. She works with the Maritime Safety Board. She can help us check if anything's missing." We stepped inside, and Mara's eyes swept the room before she moved toward the stairs. I led them up, the flashlight beam shaking slightly in my hand. At the attic door I paused, hand on the knob, feeling the cold metal. Mara placed a hand on my shoulder. "Stay behind me." I nodded, and she pushed the door open. The attic was dim, boxes stacked along the walls. In the center, the chest stood open, its contents scattered. Papers fluttered to the floor like startled birds. Mara knelt, picking up a folder labeled "Second Breath, Phase 2. She frowned. "This is the detailed schematics for the next generation of the safety system," she said, her voice low. "If someone gets this, they could replicate it without our oversight." I felt a cold prickle along my spine. Who would want that? Lucas stepped forward, eyes scanning the room. "Maybe someone who thinks they can profit from it." Mara stood, holding the folder tightly. "We need to secure this, and we need to find out who broke in." I glanced at the floor, where a single muddy shoe print marred the dust near the window. Someone had come in, taken what they wanted, and left in a hurry. Later, after Mara and Lucas left, I sat back down at the desk, the affidavit still in my hand. The house felt too quiet, the walls listening. I thought of Evelyn's voice on the USB, her soft insistence that the technology belonged to the world, not to a price tag. I thought of Celeste's bright smile as she talked about the Paris trip, her excitement barely hiding the pressure she felt to succeed. I thought of Brandon's desperate plea, his fear of losing everything he'd built on shaky ground. A promise formed in my mind, quiet but firm. I would see the trust activated. I would make sure Evelyn's work reached those who needed it. And I would find out who had invaded our home, no matter the cost. Just as I stood to stretch, the phone rang again. I hesitated, then answered. "This is Arthur." A voice, low and unfamiliar, spoke. "We know you have the papers. Hand them over, and no one gets hurt." The line went dead. My pulse hammered in my ears. I looked at the empty hallway, at the dark windows, at the stairs that led to the attic, where someone had rifled through Evelyn's legacy. A cold determination settled over me. I would not let fear dictate my actions. I would protect what Evelyn had built. I would find the truth. The low hum of the refrigerator vibrated through the floorboards as I stood in the kitchen, fingers wrapped around the cool ceramic mug. Steam curled upward, carrying the faint scent of old coffee beans. I had not slept well, the threatening call still echoing in my ears, and the attic door lay ajar downstairs, like a silent accusation. A soft knock came from the back door, pulling me from my thoughts. I wiped my hands on a towel and moved toward the entrance, the wooden floor creaking under each step. "Lucas?" I called, peering through the peephole. He smiled, holding a paper cup that released a swirl of cinnamon steam. Morning, Arthur. Mind if I come in? He stepped inside, shaking off a light drizzle that clung to his jacket. The scent of wet wool mixed with the aroma of brewing coffee, creating a strange comfort. I gestured toward the small table near the window. Please. I made coffee. It's not fancy, but it's hot. He sat. He took the seat, creaking slightly. Thanks. I heard about the attic. Mara called me this morning. Said they found a muddy print near the window. He leaned forward, eyes earnest. I'm sorry you had to go through that. I swallowed, feeling the tightness in my chest ease a fraction. It's not just the intrusion. It's what they took. I paused, choosing my words carefully. The folder labeled, Second Breath, Phase 2. If someone gets those schematics, they could copy the system without any oversight. My voice stayed low, but the urgency was clear. Lucas nodded, his gaze drifting to the rain streaking the glass. Evelyn built something that could save lives. It makes sense people would want to control it. He reached into his coat and pulled out a folded piece of paper. I spoke with Officer Hale yesterday. He mentioned the Coast Guard report about Seagrace's safety system failing. He thinks someone tampered with the release valve. I felt a prickle of anger mixed with fear. Someone tried to silence the very thing that saved Lily. I lifted my mug, the warmth seeping into my palms. We need to protect what Evelyn intended, not let it become a weapon for profit. He set the paper down, unfolding it slowly. I have an idea. Instead of fighting over or try to take the boat back, what if we use Seagrace itself as a floating test platform? The boat already has the hull, the steering, the basic electronics. We could install a stripped-down version of Second Breath there, run trials, collect data. He tapped his finger on the sketch of a small device. It would honor her work and give us proof the technology works in real conditions. I stared at the drawing, the lines forming a promise. That could work. But we need authority, funding, and we need to make sure the trust Evelyn set up is active. My mind raced to the affidavit I had signed days ago, the one that transferred intellectual property to the Evelyn Sterling Maritime Safety Fund. I filed the papers with Attorney Henderson. He says the fund is ready, but we still need to board approval for any deployment. Lucas smiled, a hint of relief in his eyes. Good. I can bring in a contact from the Maritime Safety Board who believes in open-source life-saving gear. They sometimes grant sea trials for prototypes that meet safety standards. He paused, looking at me intently. And we need to keep Brandon and Celeste away from this. They see only dollar signs. A bitter laugh escaped me. They saw $46,000 and thought that was the whole story. I remembered Brandon's slick smile when he offered the cash. Celeste's excited chatter about Paris. They never asked what Evelyn actually built. Lucas's expression softened. She built it for people like Lily, not for price tags. He reached across the table, his hand covering mine briefly. I owe her a life. I'll do whatever I can to keep Second Breath alive. The words settled between us, quiet but firm. Outside, the rain intensified, drumming a steady rhythm on the roof. I felt a shift, a sense of purpose replacing the helplessness that had clung to me since the attic incident. Let's meet at the dock tomorrow morning, I said, my voice gaining strength. We can bring the USB, look at the schematics together, and decide what we need to bring aboard. I glanced at the clock on the wall, the hands moving inexorably toward 10. We have to act, before anyone else tries to steal more. He nodded, finishing his coffee. I'll bring my toolkit and a spare battery. We should also bring a waterproof case for the evidence. He stood, stretching his shoulders. I'll text you the address of the cafe near the East Pier. It's quiet early, good for talking. I walked him to the door, feeling the cool air brush my cheeks as we stepped onto the porch. Thank you, Lucas, for believing in this, for remembering Lily. I hesitated, then added, and for not seeing Evelyn's work as just another asset to trade. He smiled, genuine and warm. Anytime, Arthur. We'll get this right. He turned toward his car, the engine purring to life as he pulled away. I closed the door, the lock clicking softly. The house seemed to breathe with me, the creaks and sighs now sounding less like warnings and more like encouragement. I moved back to the kitchen, refilling my mug with fresh coffee. As the dark liquid swirled, I thought about the USB tucked in my desk drawer, the recording of Evelyn's voice promising to finish what she started. A sudden, sharp rap on the window made me jump. I turned, heart pounding, to see a dark sedan idling at the curb, its windows tinted so I could not see inside. The engine hummed low, a sound that felt both familiar and threatening. The vehicle did not move, its presence a silent question hanging in the damp air. That dark sedan sitting at my curb was no coincidence. I turned the deadbolt, my breath hitching in my throat, and stepped away from the window before the driver could see my silhouette. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird, but I forced my hands to remain steady as I reached for the kitchen phone. "Lucas," I whispered, the moment he answered. "The car. It is back." "What do you mean, back?" His voice was low, sharp with instant concern. "Did you see who was inside? Tinted windows. Engine idling. It has been sitting there for 5 minutes, just watching the house." "Stay away from the windows," he commanded, his tone shifting into the steady authority he used when we worked on the boat. "Do not engage. I am 5 minutes away. I am going to circle the block and approach from the alley behind your garage. Turn off your lights." "I am going dark," I said, hitting the switch. The room plunged into shadows, save for the faint moonlight filtering through the blinds. "Good. Keep the phone on. If anyone approaches the door, you make sure they know you have a weapon and you are ready to use it. I will be there in 3. I hung up and moved into the hallway, away from the glass. The silence of the house felt heavy, suffocating. Every floorboard creak sounded like a footstep. I thought of Evelyn. I thought of the way she used to joke that our house was built to keep the world out. But tonight, those walls felt like a trap. I went to the closet, retrieved the heavy flashlight I kept for emergencies, and gripped it like a club. My ears strained for the sound of tires on the pavement. Outside, the idling engine cut out. My pulse spiked. I held my breath, listening to the muffled scrape of a shoe on the sidewalk. Then, a sharp, rhythmic tapping began at my front door. Not a knock, a sequence. 3 quick taps, a pause, then 2 more. "Arthur," a voice hissed. It was not Lucas. It was Brandon. "Go away, Brandon," I shouted, my voice sounding steadier than I felt. "I am calling the police." "Open the damn door, Dad. We have nothing to hide. Celeste is in the car. She is freezing. And we need to talk about the fun before you make a mistake that lands you in jail." I moved toward the door but kept a safe distance, peering through the small slit of the side window. Brandon stood on the porch, his collar turned up against the damp wind. Behind him, the dark sedan sat empty. Celeste was nowhere to be seen. "You are trespassing," I said, my voice echoing through the wood. "Leave now, or I call the sheriff." "You do not get it, do you?" Brandon's voice turned desperate, losing its smooth sheen. "The lawyer told us what you did. You think you can just bury Mom's work in some fake fund? That is intellectual property, Arthur. It is ours. Celeste needs it for the brand, and we are not letting some imaginary foundation stop us. It is not a foundation, Brandon. It is her life's work. A work you sold for pocket change because you were too greedy to look inside the box." "I know what is inside the box," he yelled, slamming his palm against the door. "I know about the $4 million offer. You are keeping that money for yourself, aren't you? Living here, acting like the grieving widower while sitting on a fortune." I felt a surge of cold fury, so intense it burned. "I have not taken a single cent for myself. That money does not belong to you, and it certainly does not belong to the clothing line. Celeste is running into the ground." "Open the door," he roared. Suddenly, tires screeched at the end of the driveway. Lucas's truck roared into view, high beams cutting through the darkness and blinding Brandon. My son shielded his eyes, stumbling back as the truck swerved, pulling up perpendicular to the sedan. Lucas jumped out, his flashlight beam slicing through the mist. "Get off his property, Brandon," Lucas shouted, his voice booming with the strength of a man who had faced the ocean in a storm. Brandon whirled around, his face a mask of panicked rage. "Stay out of this, Reed. This is family business." "It ceased to be family business when you started breaking into attics and sabotaging safety equipment," Lucas retorted, closing the distance between them. "I have the sheriff on speed dial. Do you want to explain to them why you are stalking your father?" Brandon backed up toward the sedan. "This is not over. We have lawyers. We have rights. You are stealing from us, Arthur. The law will decide what belongs to whom," I said, opening the door just a crack. "And the law has already seen the documents you tried to steal." Brandon's face went pale. He climbed into the sedan, the engine roaring to life as he peeled away, the tires throwing gravel against my porch. Lucas reached me a moment later, his chest heaving. "Are you all right?" he asked, checking the hallway behind me. "I am fine," I said, though my hands were shaking now that the adrenaline was beginning to fade. He is terrified. He knows the evidence Henderson has is real. Lucas stepped inside and locked the door behind him. He is desperate. Desperate men do stupid things, Arthur. We need to get you to a safe house. Not tonight, maybe, but soon. And we need to get that USB to Henderson by morning. I agree. I went to the kitchen and retrieved the small drive. We leave at first light. We sat at the kitchen table, the silence now punctuated by the ticking of the clock. We did not speak of Brandon, or Celeste, or the money. We spoke of the trials, of how to ensure the technology would not just work, but be affordable for the local fishermen who needed it most. It was a strange contrast, discussing the mechanics of safety while the threat of my own son lingered in the air like smoke. "Look at this," Lucas said, unfolding a printout he had brought. "If we adjust the pressure release valve here, we can cut production costs by 30% without sacrificing the integrity of the flotation." Evelyn had the right idea, but she was limited by the manufacturing processes of 2 years ago. I leaned in, tracing the lines with my finger. She was always pushing for a modular design. She wanted people to be able to replace the valve themselves if it clogged. "Exactly," Lucas said. "It is genius. It is simple, effective, and it saves lives. If we get this into the hands of the Shipyard Collective, we can have a prototype ready by next month." "Brandon will never let it go quietly," I said, staring at the blueprints. "He thinks he is losing a legacy. He does not realize he is the one who dismantled it." "He is a fool," Lucas said, his tone dismissive. "Greed has a way of blinding people to the reality of their own mistakes. He thinks the value is in the patents. He does not see that the value is in the implementation. If we get the gear on the water, his patents become worthless because nobody will want his overpriced, unreliable garbage." I nodded, the plan finally feeling tangible. We need to document every single test run, not just for the board, but for the public. We show them it works. We show them why Evelyn created it. "Exactly," Lucas agreed. "And if he tries to block it, we have the Coast Guard reports. We have the proof of his sabotage. The Maritime Safety Board will blacklist him before he even gets a hearing." I looked at Lucas, his face set in a look of determination. "Why are you doing this, Lucas? Truly, you had your rescue. You could have moved on." "Lily," he said softly. "Every time I look at her, I remember that night. I remember the sound of that device clicking into place. It was not a machine to me, Arthur. It was a heartbeat. If I can help give that to someone else, then I have paid my debt to your wife." I felt a lump form in my throat. She would have liked you, Lucas. She always said that the best engineers were the ones who built things with their hearts, not just their heads. "Then we owe it to her to do this right," he said. The sun began to bleed over the horizon, painting the sky in pale streaks of violet and gray. We packed the documents into a waterproof bag, the same one I had prepared for the journey to Henderson's office. I took one last look around the house. It felt smaller, less like a vault for memories and more like a bridge to somewhere else. We drove to the office of Attorney Henderson in silence. The city was just waking up, the streets filled with early commuters, oblivious to the drama that had unfolded just hours before. Henderson's office was a modern, glass-fronted building overlooking the bay. As we walked through the lobby, I felt a sense of finality. The secretary ushered us into the conference room. Henderson sat at the head of the table, his expression professional but weary. He had been working through the night. "Gentlemen," he said, gesturing for us to sit, "I have been reviewing the files you sent over. The case for the fund is ironclad. Brandon's attempt to claim ownership is legally bankrupt, and I have already filed an injunction to freeze his assets regarding any patent-related income. He is effectively locked out." "And the sabotage?" I asked. "The sheriff is currently compiling a report for the district attorney," Henderson said. "The tampering with the safety system is a serious crime. It is not just theft, it is attempted negligence resulting in danger. If they can tie him to the sedan in the garage, he will be looking at significant jail time." I leaned back in my chair. "He is my son. I never wanted this. I know, Henderson said, his tone softening. But you are protecting Evelyn's vision. That is what matters now. We have the papers ready for the formal activation of the Evelyn Sterling Maritime Safety Fund. Once signed, the project is officially public. I took the pen from his hand. The weight of it felt substantial. A bridge to a future that Evelyn had designed, even if she could not be here to see it. I signed my name at the bottom of the page, the ink dark and permanent. It is done, I whispered. Yes, it is, Henderson agreed. Now, we have a public announcement to draft. We need to introduce Second Breath, or as I believe you have decided to call it, Evelyn's Embrace. That is right, I said. It is what it is. A promise kept. We spent the next several hours drafting the press release. We kept it simple, focusing on the history of the invention, the safety trials, and the commitment to affordable access. By midday, the draft was finished. I walked out of the building into the bright, sharp light of the afternoon. The air felt different, cleaner, like a storm had passed through and cleared the rot. Lucas stopped beside me near the parking lot. Do you want to get some lunch? No, I said. I want to go to the dock. I want to see Sea Grace again. I want to know she is ready for what comes next. We drove back to the marina. The sky now a brilliant, cloudless blue. The water sparkled, a million shards of light dancing on the surface. When we reached the dock, I saw something that stopped me in my tracks. A small group of people were standing near my slip, clustered around a boat. Not mine, but the one adjacent. A man, a fisherman I recognized from the morning fleet, was holding a piece of equipment, pointing at it and shaking his head. As I walked closer, I realized it was the same brand of safety gear Brandon had been pushing. They were talking about a failure, a leak, a malfunction. I am telling you, the man said, his voice rising. The seal just popped. It is the third time this month. I stood there, listening. They were talking about the competition. They were talking about Brandon's failure. It was as if the news of his lawsuit had already begun to ripple through the harbor. Hey Arthur, the man called out, noticing me. You heard about the Sterling boy. Word is he's in trouble with the law. I nodded, my face a mask of neutral calm. There are some legal issues being resolved, yes. Good, the fisherman grunted. His gear is garbage. Always has been. We need something that actually works. We need the real deal. Lucas looked at me, a silent grin on his face. I knew what he was thinking. The market was ready. The people were waiting. We have something coming, I told them. Something reliable. The men turned. Their interest piqued. I realized then that Brandon had never bothered to understand the people he was selling to. He had treated them like numbers, like statistics. And in the end, they were the ones who would dismantle his reputation. Keep us posted, the fisherman said. We are tired of being treated like suckers. We walked the rest of the way to the slip. Sea Grace was sitting low in the water, her lines secure, her hull reflecting the blue of the sky. She looked different today. She looked like a vessel with a purpose. I climbed aboard, my boots making a hollow sound against the deck. Everything was in its place. The storage compartment where the USB had been was empty, but the boat itself felt full. She is ready, Lucas said, stepping on behind me. I walked to the bow and looked out toward the horizon, where the sea met the sky in an endless, smooth line. I thought about the first time Evelyn and I had taken this boat out, the way she had laughed when the salt spray hit her face. She had been so full of light, so focused on the future. My phone rang. It was Attorney Henderson. Arthur, he said, his voice urgent. You need to turn on the news. What happened? Brandon and Celeste. They were arrested at the airport. They were trying to board a flight to Europe. They had suitcases full of cash and a laptop with encrypted files. The authorities caught them just as they were clearing security. Europe, I said, a bitter taste rising in my throat. They really were going to run. They are in custody now, Henderson continued. The DA is going to hold them without bail until the hearing. The evidence of the sabotage was the final straw. They have them on camera in the garage. Arthur, they have everything. Thank you, Henderson. Keep me posted. I ended the call and tucked the phone away. I felt no joy in their arrest, only a deep sense of exhaustion. The greed that had defined their lives had finally reached its logical conclusion. They were trapped by their own choices, and for the first time in months, The weight of the sterling name did not feel like a burden. "They are caught," I said to Lucas. He looked at me, his expression somber. "It is over then. For them, maybe," I said. "But for us, the work is just beginning." I reached into my pocket and pulled out the small brass key Evelyn had given me years ago, the one that opened the locker in the cabin. I had not opened it since she died. I walked to the cabin door, inserted the key, and turned it. The mechanism clicked, a sound as familiar as a heartbeat. Inside, sitting on the small bench, was a logbook. I opened it. It was full of entries, written in Evelyn's elegant, slanted hand. Notes on pressure valves, water resistance, buoyancy, but on the very last page, there was a message. "To my dear Arthur, if you are reading this, it means you have stopped looking for me in the past and have started looking for the way forward. You were always the one who held us together, my love. Now, hold this promise for me. Do not let the sea take anyone else who can be saved." I sat on the bench, the logbook held tightly in my hands. The cabin was silent, but for the first time, it did not feel empty. The air smelled of salt and ozone, a hint of a change in the weather. I stood up, went back out onto the deck, and breathed in the cool, clear air. "Lucas," I called out. He walked over, his eyes scanning the horizon. "Yeah? Let's start the engines." He blinked, then grinned. "You want to take her out?" "I want to see how she handles the deep water," I said. "We have a prototype to build, and there is no better place to test it than where Evelyn first imagined it." I went to the helm, my hands instinctively finding the controls. The engine roared to life, a deep, resonant rumble that shook the deck beneath my feet. I cast off the lines, the rope sliding through the cleats, with a satisfying hiss. Seagrace pulled away from the dock, her prow slicing through the water as we headed out into the open bay. The wind picked up, catching the sails and pulling us forward, out past the breakwater and into the rolling swells of the Pacific. It was a beautiful day, the kind of day that felt like a new beginning. Behind us, the marina shrunk until it was nothing more than a dot on the coastline. In front of us, the world opened up, vast and full of possibility. I felt a presence beside me, a shift in the air that was more felt than seen. It was not Evelyn, not really, but it was the echo of her, the ghost of the woman who had dared to believe that safety was not just a luxury, but a right. I steered the boat toward the deeper channel, the waves growing larger, the water turning a deep, rich indigo. "You're doing it, Arthur," Lucas shouted over the wind. "I'm just getting started," I shouted back. I checked the throttle, my eyes scanning the gauges. Everything was operating within the normal range. I reached down and touched the small box we had mounted to the console, the prototype for the second generation of Evelyn's Embrace. It was small, nondescript, but inside, it held the culmination of years of work, of love, and of defiance. A dark shadow swept over the deck as a cloud passed in front of the sun, but I did not steer away. I kept the boat on its course, riding the swell, heading toward the deep water where the real testing would begin. In the distance, I saw a small fishing vessel heading back toward the harbor, its hull battered by the waves. I checked my course, making sure to steer clear, my mind already calculating the safety protocols, the distance, the deployment speed. I was no longer an observer of the sea. I was a guardian of it. The boat rose on the crest of a large wave, then plunged into the trough, the spray flying high in the air. I braced myself, laughing into the wind, the salt taste on my lips feeling like a baptism. I looked down at my hands, weathered, wrinkled, and strong, and realized I was finally at peace. The horizon was clear. The engines were steady, and for the first time since Evelyn had left, I felt as though I was exactly where I was meant to be. I pushed the throttle forward, the boat accelerating as we surged into the heart of the Pacific, leaving the old life, the betrayals, and the failures in our wake. We were sailing into the future, and there was nothing that could stop us now. As we reached the open sea, a sudden, sharp alarm blared from the console. I froze, my eyes darting to the sensor array. A rapid pressure drop in the starboard engine room. I cut the throttle, the boat slowing as the warning lights flared red across the dashboard. Lucas rushed over, his face pale as he looked at the readouts. Pressure drop. What is happening? I grabbed the diagnostic tool and sprinted toward the engine hatch. As I threw it open, A cloud of acrid, black smoke poured out, choking the air. I coughed, shielding my eyes, and peered down into the compartment. The secondary fuel line had been sheared clean off. Not a mechanical failure. Not a worn-out hose. A precise, deliberate cut. "It's sabotaged!" I screamed over the roar of the dying engine. The fuel line was sliced. The boat groaned as a rogue wave hit us broadside, tilting the deck to a precarious angle. We were drifting toward the rocks, the current pushing us hard. I scrambled for the emergency shutoff, my heart screaming that we were not out of this yet. The dark sedan was gone, the lawyers were blocked, but the reach of their greed had gone deeper than we ever imagined. "I can't believe they actually took everything," Celeste whispered, her voice trembling as she stared at the eviction notice. I stood in the dim hallway of our once-bright home, the weight of the paper in her hand pulling my thoughts back to the day the sea had taken my wife's voice. The hallway smelled of old polish and faint sea salt, a reminder of the boat that had once been our pride. My hand rested on the banister, the wood cool under my palm, while I tried to make sense of the sudden collapse of everything we had built. Celeste's eyes were red, the mascara streaking down her cheeks like tide lines on sand. She shoved the notice onto the side table, the paper fluttering before settling. "They said the loan was called in yesterday," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "The bank says we owe more than the house is worth." I felt a cold knot tighten in my stomach, the same feeling I had when Evelyn's voice faded on the USB recording. "Who gave them the authority to call it in?" I asked, trying to keep my tone steady, though the worry churned beneath. She looked at me, her gaze flickering between anger and disbelief. "Your brother's lawyer called them. Said the money from the boat sale was never ours to keep, that it belonged to some fund Evelyn set up." A flash of memory surged. Evelyn's soft voice on the recording, her words about a fund for maritime safety. I had dismissed it as a grieving widow's wish, never imagining it would become a weapon against us. "That fund was never meant to be touched," I muttered, more to myself than to her. Celeste let out a bitter laugh, short and harsh. "And now we're left with nothing. No house, no brand, no future." She turned away, staring out the front window where the dark sedan still idled, its engine a low hum like a distant tide. I moved closer, placing a hand on her shoulder. She flinched, then softened under my touch. "We still have each other," I said, hoping the words carried more conviction than I felt. She shook her head, tears spilling anew. "Each other? Celeste? We built a life on appearances. Now the curtain's fallen, and the audience is laughing." I wanted to tell her that appearances were never the foundation Evelyn had hoped for, but the words felt hollow. Instead, I guided her to the kitchen, hoping the routine of making tea might steady us both. The kettle whistled, a sharp sound that cut through the silence. I filled the pot, measured the leaves, and watched the water swirl, a small, familiar ritual that felt like anchoring a boat in a storm. While the tea steeped, I heard a soft knock at the door. My heart leapt, thinking it might be the bank or a process server. I called out, "Who is it?" A voice I recognized answered, low and wary. "Lucas Reed." I opened the door to find him standing on the porch, his hands clasped tightly, his usual confidence replaced by something resembling guilt. Behind him, Lily clung to his leg, her eyes wide and wary. "Mr. Sterling," Lucas began, his voice rough. "I heard about the notice. I wanted to see if there's anything I can do." I studied his face, remembering the day he'd pulled my granddaughter from the water, the way his relief had mirrored my own when Lily surfaced safe. "You've already done more than most," I replied, gesturing for him to come inside. He stepped over the threshold, Lily peeking shyly from behind his leg. "I brought some papers," he said, handing me a thin envelope. "The Maritime Board sent a notice about the fund. They want to verify the transfer of rights." I took the envelope, feeling the paper's thinness, like a fragile sail. Inside was a formal letter, the seal of the Maritime Safety Board, requesting documentation of Evelyn's intellectual property transfer. My mind raced. Had Evelyn truly set something in motion that could protect us now? Lucas shifted his weight, his gaze dropping to the floor. "I tried to stop them," he admitted. "I told the bank the boat sale didn't include the technology, but they wouldn't listen." I felt a surge of gratitude tempered by sorrow. "Thank you for trying," I said. "It means more than you know." Lily looked up at me, her small hand reaching for mine. I knelt to her level, meeting her earnest eyes. "Are you okay, sweetheart?" I asked, my voice softer than I intended. She nodded, her grip tightening. "I missed the boat," she whispered. I stood, feeling the weight of her small hand in mine, and thought of the sea's endless horizon. The day's events pressed on me like a tide, but beneath the pressure lay a current of purpose I had not felt since Evelyn's passing. Later, after Lucas and Lily left, I sat at the desk where Evelyn's USB lay. The device glowed faintly, a reminder of the work she had poured into the world. I opened the file labeled, "For Arthur," and listened again to her voice, steady and warm. "If Brandon sells the boat, don't buy it back to save it. Finish what I built to save others." Her words settled in my chest, like an anchor finding purchase in sand. I realized then that the fight was not for a house or a brand, but for the promise she had made to the sea, and to those who depended on it. I picked up the phone, my fingers trembling slightly as I dialed the number of the Maritime Board's liaison officer. The line clicked, and a courteous voice answered. "Good afternoon. May I help you?" "This is Arthur Sterling," I said, choosing each word carefully. "I need to confirm the transfer of Evelyn Sterling's maritime safety technology to the safety fund. I have documentation here." There was a pause, then the officer replied, "Mr. Sterling, we've been expecting your call. Please send the documents to our secure email, and we'll begin verification immediately." Relief washed over me, though it was tinged with the lingering ache of loss. I thanked him and hung up, the receiver clicking softly in my ear. Celeste appeared in the doorway, her arms wrapped around herself. "Did they?" she began, unable to finish. "They'll process it," I answered. "It won't bring back the house, but it will keep Evelyn's work alive." She stepped closer, her eyes searching mine for any sign of hope. "And us?" she asked. I reached out, taking her hand in mine. "We'll find a way forward. It won't be easy, but we have each other and the memory of what she wanted us to protect." She leaned into my touch, a single tear escaping down her cheek. "I just wanted to give her a good life," she murmured. "And she wanted us to give life to others," I replied, feeling the truth of her words settle like a tide, pulling back to reveal new shore. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the shutters, a sound that reminded me of sails snapping in a gust. I glanced toward the harbor, where the dark sedan had vanished, leaving only the quiet lapping of water against the pier. The night deepened, and I stood at the window, watching the stars emerge one by one, each a distant point of light guiding vessels home. In that moment, I understood that Evelyn's legacy was not a thing to be held, but a current to be felt, pulling us forward even as the world seemed to sink beneath us. I turned away from the window and walked to the kitchen, where the coffee pot gurgled on the stove. The scent of roasted beans filled the air and steadied my breath. I poured a mug and set it on the table before moving to the sink to rinse the cup. A soft knock sounded at the door just as I turned the faucet off. I wiped my hands on a towel and walked to the entrance, pausing to glance through the peephole. Lucas stood on the porch, his coat damp from the early mist, Lily clutching his hand and looking up with wide eyes. "Morning," Lucas said, his voice low but steady. "I thought we could start early today." I opened the door and stepped aside, gesturing for them to come in. "Come in, you both look chilled." Lily slipped off her small boots and placed them neatly by the mat. She looked up at me and whispered, "Did the boat feel better last night?" I knelt to her level and brushed a stray strand of hair from her forehead. It felt steady, like a promise kept. I stood and gestured toward the kitchen. "Would you like some juice?" Lily nodded, and Lucas took a seat at the table, his elbows resting on the wood. I poured juice into a small glass and set it before her. She took a cautious sip, her eyes never leaving the steam rising from my mug. "Did you hear from the Maritime Board?" Lucas asked, his gaze steady. I nodded, recalling the conversation from last night. They confirmed receipt of the documents. Verification should start within the week. He leaned forward, his hands clasped. "That means we can move forward with the prototype sooner than we thought." I felt a flicker of hope rise in my chest, but I kept my voice even. "We still need to test the system on Seagrace before we can trust it with anyone else." Lily set her glass down and looked at me with earnestness. "Will it keep people safe like it kept me safe?" I reached for her hand and gave it a gentle squeeze. "That is the hope." A sudden crash echoed from the backyard, making us all jump. I rushed to the back door and flung it open, heart pounding. A large branch had snapped from the old oak and crashed onto the patio table, scattering plates and a half-filled water jug. "Are you all right?" Lily asked, her voice trembling. I stepped outside and surveyed the damage. The branch lay across the table, its leaves rustling in the breeze. I gripped the edge of the table and pushed the wood aside, feeling the rough bark against my palms. The tree gave way under the weight of the storm last night. I muttered more to myself than to anyone. Lucas joined me, his boots crunching on the gravel. We should clear this before it hurts anyone else. Together we lifted the branch and moved it to the side of the yard, placing it where it could not roll back onto the patio. The wood was heavy, but the effort warmed my muscles and cleared my mind. When we returned inside, Lily was already at the table, drawing on a napkin with a crayon. She looked up and showed me a sketch of a boat with a red puff of air above it. "Is that the boat that helped me?" she asked. I smiled and took the crayon from her hand. "Yes, that is the boat that carried the safety device." I traced the shape of the vessel with my finger, feeling the smooth paper under my tip. "And this puff is the air that kept you afloat." Lucas watched us for a moment before speaking. "I checked the engine on Sea Grace this morning. The fuel lines look intact, but I noticed a small nick near the coupling. It could be nothing, but I want to replace it just in case." I nodded, appreciating his thoroughness. "Better safe than sorry. Let's get the part from the marina and have it installed before we head out." He stood and headed toward the door. "I'll be back in an hour. Keep the coffee warm." I watched him go, then turned to Lily. "Would you like to help me sort the tools for the boat?" She nodded eagerly and slipped off her chair. We walked to the garage where a rack of wrenches, screwdrivers, and spare parts waited. I handed her a small wrench and showed her how to turn a bolt clockwise. She mimicked my motion, her face scrunched in concentration. As we worked, the radio in the corner crackled with a news bulletin. The anchor spoke of a recent rescue off the coast, where a flashing beacon had guided a lifeboat to a capsized skiff. The reporter mentioned that the device used a similar activation mechanism to the one Evelyn had designed. I felt a prickle on the back of my neck, not fear but a quiet affirmation that her work was already saving lives. Lily paused, her brow furrowed. "Did the lady who made it know it would help people?" I set the wrench down and looked at her. She hoped it would. She spent many nights testing it in the garage, listening to the hiss of air and watching the gauges dip. She nodded slowly, as if processing the weight of her words. "I want to be like her when I grow up." I reached out and brushed a stray lock of hair from her face. "You already have her heart." The sound of a car pulling up outside made us both look toward the window. A dark sedan idled at the curb, its engine low. I felt a tightening in my shoulders, but I forced myself to stay calm. The vehicle remained still, its windows tinted, no movement visible inside. Lucas appeared at the doorway, his expression cautious. "Someone's waiting out there." I stepped forward and placed a hand on the door, feeling the cool metal under my palm. "Let's see what they want." I opened the door just enough to speak, without inviting them in. The driver's window rolled down slowly, revealing a man in a dark suit, his face obscured by sunglasses. He held a leather briefcase tightly against his chest. "Good morning," he said, his tone flat. "I am here on behalf of a private investor interested in the maritime safety technology you are developing." I kept my voice steady, refusing to let curiosity show. "We are not looking for investors at this time. The technology is already pledged to a nonprofit fund." He tilted his head slightly, the glasses catching the morning light. "The fund you mentioned is still in paperwork. A private backer could accelerate the process, ensure the device reaches more vessels faster." I felt a flicker of irritation but kept my expression neutral. "The fund's paperwork is already filed. Acceleration would bypass the oversight Evelyn insisted upon." He shifted his weight, the briefcase creaking. "Perhaps a partnership could be arranged, one that benefits both parties." I glanced back at Lily, who was watching us from the kitchen doorway, her small hand clutching the crayon. I turned my attention back to the man. Any partnership must keep the technology open and accessible. No exclusive rights, no inflated prices. He seemed to consider my words, then nodded slowly. "I will convey your stance to my client. Thank you for your time." He rolled up his window, and the sedan pulled away, disappearing down the road. I closed the door and leaned against it, breathing out slowly. The encounter left a sour taste, but it also confirmed that interest in Evelyn's work was growing beyond our circle. Lucas rejoined me in the kitchen, wiping his hands on a towel. That was odd. Did they seem threatening? I shook my head, more curious than hostile. Still, we should keep the prototype secure until the verification is complete. He nodded. I'll double-check the locks on the boathouse tonight. I turned to Lily, who had returned to her drawing. She held up the napkin now colored with a bright red swoosh above the boat. Look, I added the rescue flare. I laughed softly, the sound light and genuine. That's perfect. You've captured the spirit of the invention. She beamed, pride shining in her eyes. Can we go see the boat today? I glanced at the clock on the wall. The hands pointed to just past 9. We can, after we finish checking the fuel line. She clapped her hands softly, delighted. I felt a warmth spread through my chest, not the fleeting joy of praise, but a deeper sense of purpose, settling like an anchor in sand. Later, after the sun had climbed higher, Lucas returned with a sealed package of marina-grade fuel line. We carried it down to the dock where Sea Grace bobbed gently against the wooden pilings. The boat's white hull gleamed under the bright sky, a silent promise waiting to be fulfilled. I knelt beside the engine compartment and examined the existing line. The nick Lucas had spotted was indeed a hairline fracture, barely visible but enough sunlight made out. Lucas a new piece and tightened. The fit was snug, the metal cool against my fingers. We secured the clamps and gave the line a gentle tug to ensure it would not slip. All set, Lucas said, wiping his brow with the back of his hand. Ready for a test run? I stood and stretched my back, feeling the familiar pull of salt air on my skin. Let's take her out for a short spin. We'll monitor the pressure readings and see if the release valve responds as expected. Lily bounced on the balls of her feet, her excitement contagious. Can I come? I looked at her hopeful face, and then at Lucas, who gave a small nod. You can stay on the dock and watch. We'll keep you safe. She squealed softly and ran to the edge of the pier, planting her feet firmly as we untied the lines and eased the boat forward. The motor hummed to life, a low, steady thrum that vibrated through the soles of my boots. As we moved away from the shore, the water sparkled, catching the light in 1,000 tiny shards. I kept one hand on the wheel and the other on the throttle, feeling the response of the engine under my touch. Lucas stood beside me, his eyes scanning the horizon for any sign of trouble. The wind tugged at my hair, carrying with it the faint scent of seaweed and distant rain. After a few minutes, I eased the throttle back and guided the boat into a gentle circle. I watched the pressure gauge on the console, the needle trembling slightly as the system primed. Then, with a soft click, the release valve opened, releasing a burst of air that lifted a small test buoy attached to the stern. The buoy rose quickly, bobbing on the surface before settling back down. A grin spread across Lily's face as she clapped her hands. It worked. I laughed, the sound bright and free. It did. Evelyn's design is holding true. Lucas placed a hand on my shoulder, his grip firm but reassuring. We did it together. We spent the balloon, eyes navigation, the nothing of the tested after systems, the boats ramping a focus on keeping the turned. The sun began to dip low on the horizon, casting a golden glow across the water. We turned the boat toward the dock, the engine purring smoothly as we glided into the slip. I tied off the lines and stepped onto the wooden planks, feeling the solidity beneath my feet. Lucas helped me secure the boat, checking the knots and making sure the fenders were in place. Lily bounced forward, her small hands reaching for the rope, and I let her hold the end while I fastened it. Thank you for letting me help, she said, her voice earnest. I knelt to her level and brushed a stray strand of hair from her cheek. You helped more than you know. You reminded us why we do this. She smiled, her eyes shining. I want to be a captain someday. I stood and looked out at the water, the sky now streaked with pink and orange. The day's work settled into a quiet satisfaction, a feeling that the tide was turning in our favor. Later that evening, after Lily had gone to bed with a storybook tucked under her arm, I sat at the desk where Evelyn's USB lay. The device glowed faintly, a soft pulse of light in the dim room. I opened the file labeled, "For Arthur," and pressed play. Evelyn's voice filled the room, warm and steady. If Brandon sells the boat, do not repurchase it to preserve it. Instead, complete what I constructed to rescue others. Her words settled in my chest like an anchor, gaining hold in sand. I felt the weight of her trust settle onto my shoulders, not as a burden, but as a guide. I closed the laptop and leaned back, the chair creaking softly. The house was quiet, except for the occasional creak of the old timbers settling. I stood and walked to the window, looking out at the darkening sea where the lights of distant boats flickered like fireflies. A sudden rap on the glass made me turn. A small stone had struck the pane, leaving a faint crack. I frowned, glanced outside, and saw nothing but the empty dock and the gentle lapping of waves against the pilings. I turned back to the room, the evening air cool against my skin. The night was deepening, but a steady resolve burned within me, bright as the beacon we had tested earlier. A low hum vibrated through the floorboards as I stood there. I turned toward the window and pressed my palm to the cool glass. The night air brushed my cheeks with a faint salt tang. A distant engine rumbled low on the water, fading as it rounded the point. I frowned and wondered who had thrown the stone earlier. My thoughts drifted to the stranger who had offered investment earlier that day. "Did you see anything out there?" Lucas asked from the doorway, his voice soft but alert. I shook my head, keeping my eyes on the dark water. Nothing but the usual night shift of boats. He stepped closer, his boots making a soft thud on the wooden floor. "We should check the mooring lines again, just in case." I nodded and turned to the side table where my phone lay. I lifted it and saw a missed call from an unknown number. The screen displayed no name, just a string of digits. I hesitated before pressing call back. A quiet voice answered, low and strained. "You should stop poking around where you don't belong." My stomach tightened, but I kept my tone even. "Who is this?" A short laugh followed. Then the line went dead. I stared at the device, the silence humming in my ears. Lucas moved to stand beside me, his shoulder brushing mine. That felt like a warning. I swallowed and forced my breath to steady. It could be someone trying to scare us away from the project. He glanced toward the dock where Sea Grace rested, her hull catching the moonlight. "We have the board meeting tomorrow. If they try to stop us now, it will only make them look guilty." I turned my face to his, seeing the resolve in his eyes. "Then we go ahead as planned. We bring the data, we show them the test results, we let the truth speak." He nodded, his jaw tightening. "I'll bring the logger and the buoyancy test footage. We'll have everything ready." A soft knock came at the back door. I froze, listening. The knock came again, slower this time. I whispered to Lucas, "Stay here." He gave a firm nod and moved to the side, his hand resting on the handle of the boat's winch. I crept to the door and peered through the peephole. A figure stood in the shadow of the porch, shoulders hunched, a hood pulled low. I could not see their face. "Who's there?" I called, my voice steadier than I felt. The figure lifted a hand, holding out a folded piece of paper. "Leave this on the table. Do not follow." I opened the door just enough to take the paper. The stranger stepped back into the darkness and vanished without another word. I closed the door and unfolded the sheet. The ink was smudged, but the words were clear. "Stop the test, or you will regret it." My heart hammered against my ribs, but I refused to let fear dictate my actions. I walked back to the living room and placed the note on the coffee table beside the USB drive. Lucas appeared from the hallway, his expression grim. "What did it say?" he asked. I read the words aloud, feeling the weight of each syllable. He crossed his arms, his gaze fixed on the paper. "Someone does not want the board to see the results." I thought of Evelyn's voice on the recording, her insistence that we finish what she started. "We will not be stopped." He placed a hand on my shoulder, his grip firm. "We have the data, we have the witnesses, we have the boat herself. Let them try." A sudden thought struck me like a cold splash. What if they try to sabotage the demonstration itself? Lucas frowned, considering. "We will have extra eyes on the dock. I will ask Mara from the Maritime Board to bring an observer. We will also record everything on multiple devices." I nodded, feeling a surge of determination. "And we will have Lily there. She reminded us why we do this." He smiled faintly. "She will be our little mascot of hope." The night deepened, the wind picking up and rattling the shutters. I walked to the window again, watching the lights of distant boats flicker like fireflies. A sense of purpose settled in my chest, steady and warm. I thought about the stone that had cracked the glass earlier. It felt like a warning, but also a reminder that our work mattered enough to provoke fear. I turned to Lucas and said, "Let's get some rest. We have a big day ahead." He yawned, stretching his arms. "Agreed. I'll set the alarm for dawn." We moved toward the bedroom, the floorboards creaking softly under our steps. I paused at the doorway, glancing back at the living room where the note lay under the soft glow of the lamp. "Tomorrow we show them what Evelyn built," I murmured, more to myself than to him. He paused beside me, his voice low. "And we make sure no one can take that away from us." I stepped into the room, feeling the mattress sigh as I lay down. The house settled around us, the old timbers groaning in their sleep. Outside, the sea whispered against the shore, a constant reminder of the tide we were trying to turn. Sleep came slowly, my mind replaying the test run, the buoy rising, Lily's delighted clap, and the sudden crack of stone on glass. I wondered who lurked in the shadows, what they hoped to achieve, and whether our preparations would be enough. A soft snore escaped Lucas from the other side of the bed, a sound that anchored me in the present. I let my breathing slow, feeling the weight of the day lift just enough to let rest find me. In the darkness, a thought formed like a quiet promise. We would meet the challenge head-on, and the truth would not be silenced. Dawn had not yet broken, but the hum grew louder. It rose from the floorboards near the old rug, a low vibration that made the hairs on my arms stand up. I slipped out of bed, the wooden floor cool beneath my bare feet, and moved toward the source. The sound seemed to pulse in rhythm with my heartbeat, steady and insistent. I paused at the edge of the rug and pressed my palm to the wood, feeling a faint tremor travel up my arm. "Did you hear that?" I called softly, not wanting to startle Lucas if he was still asleep. He appeared in the doorway, his hair tousled, eyes still heavy with sleep. "What is it?" he asked, his voice low and rough from rest. I shook my head, unable to name the source. "Something is vibrating under the floor. It feels like a motor, but I cannot see anything." He stepped closer, crouching to examine the boards. His fingers traced the seams, searching for any irregularity. After a moment, he stood, his brow furrowed. "I do not feel anything unusual. Perhaps it is the house settling." I considered his words, but the vibration persisted, a steady thrum that seemed to come from deeper within the floorboards. I lifted the edge of the rug, revealing a narrow gap between the planks. A faint glow seeped from the crack, a pale blue light that pulsed in time with the sound. "Look," I whispered, pointing at the glow. Lucas knelt beside me, his expression shifting from sleepy to alert. "That is not normal," he murmured. He reached into the gap and pulled out a small device, no larger than a deck of cards, its surface etched with faint lines and a blinking light. "What is it?" I asked, my voice tight. "It looks like a transmitter," he said, turning the device over in his palm. "Someone placed it here to listen." My mind raced. Who would want to listen to us? The thought of someone eavesdropping on our plans made my stomach tighten. I swallowed the urge to panic and forced my voice to stay steady. "We need to remove it," I said, my fingers closing around the cool metal, "and we need to find out who put it here." Lucas nodded, his jaw set. "I will take it to Mara at the Maritime Board. She can trace the signal." I handed him the device, feeling its weight as a tangible reminder that our work had attracted unwanted attention. As he turned to leave, I caught a glimpse of movement outside the window. A dark shape slipped behind the trees near the property line, gone before I could focus. "Did you see that?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Lucas paused, his hand on the door handle. "I saw something move. It could be an animal, but I doubt it." I stepped closer to the window, pressing my forehead against the cool glass. The pre-dawn light was just beginning to bleed into the sky, turning the clouds a soft pink. Beyond the trees, the sea lay calm, its surface broken only by the occasional ripple of a distant fish. "We cannot let fear stop us," I said, more to myself than to him. "Evelyn would not have wanted us to hide." He turned back, his eyes meeting mine. "We will not. We will finish what she started." A sudden thought hit me like a splash of cold water. What if the device was not just for listening? What if it was a trigger for something more dangerous? The question hung in the air, sharp and urgent. I turned away from the window and walked back to the living room, where the note from the night before lay under the lamp. The words, "Stop the test or you will regret it," still stared back at me, ink smudged from handling. I picked it up, feeling the rough texture of the paper against my fingertips. Lucas returned shortly after, his expression grim. Mara confirmed the signal originates from a handheld transmitter. It is active only when we are near the dock. Someone is watching our movements. I felt a surge of anger mixed with determination. Then we will change our plans. We will meet them on our terms. He nodded, already thinking ahead. We will move the demonstration to the boathouse tonight. It is more secluded, and we can control the environment better. I considered the risk, but the alternative, to let fear dictate our actions, was unacceptable. I walked to the kitchen, filled the kettle, and set it on the stove. The whistle of boiling water would soon fill the house, a simple sound that grounded me in the present. As the water heated, I thought of Evelyn's voice on the recording, her calm insistence that we finish what she started. Her words were a compass, pointing us toward purpose despite the storm. The kettle sang, and I poured the hot water into a mug, the steam curling upward like a question mark. I lifted the cup to my lips, feeling the warmth spread through my hands. "Ready?" Lucas asked, leaning against the doorway. I nodded, feeling the weight of the device in my pocket and the resolve in my chest. "Let's go." We stepped outside, the morning air crisp and fresh. The sun had risen fully now, casting golden light across the yard. The sea glittered in the distance, a promise of possibility. We walked toward the dock, our steps steady. Along the way, I glanced at the horizon, where the sky met the water in a smooth line. A thought flickered. What if the threat was not just about the device, but about the message we carried? The idea sharpened my focus. When we reached the boathouse, Mara was already waiting, her expression professional but concerned. She took the device from Lucas, examining it with a practiced eye. "This is a bug," she said, her voice calm. "It transmits on a frequency used by private surveillance firms. I can trace it to a rental car registered to a company that handles corporate security." I felt a flicker of relief mixed with unease. Knowing the source did not erase the danger, but it gave us a target. "We need to act quickly," I said. "The demonstration is set for tonight. We cannot let them interfere." Mara nodded. "I will alert the authorities and increase surveillance around the property. You focus on the test." Lucas put his hand on my shoulder and squeezed firmly. "We have done everything we can to prepare. Now, we let the work speak for itself." I looked out at the water, where sea grace bobbed gently at its mooring. The boat that had once been a symbol of grief now stood as a beacon of hope. I thought of Evelyn's hands, steady and sure, as she had sketched the early designs of Second Breath on napkins during late-night conversations. A sudden cry from the dock made us turn. Lily appeared, holding a small red life jacket she had found in the storage locker. She ran up to us, her eyes bright with excitement. "Look what I found!" she exclaimed, holding up the jacket. I knelt to meet her gaze, smiling despite the tension. "That is just what we need for the demonstration," I said, taking the jacket from her hands. She beamed, proud of her contribution. "Will it keep people safe?" "It will help keep them safe," I replied, my voice soft. "Just like your mother wanted." Lucas laughed softly, the sound warm and genuine. "She would be proud of you, kiddo." Lily's grin widened, and she slipped the jacket over her shoulders, striking a pose that made us both laugh. The moment was brief but precious, a reminder of why we persisted. I stood, feeling the weight of the jacket in my arms, and turned to Mara. "Thank you for your help," I said sincerely. She nodded. "Just doing my part." We spent the next few hours preparing the boathouse for the demonstration. We set up monitors, connected the Second Breath unit to a test tank, and ran through the procedure repeatedly. Each click of a connector, each hiss of water, each beep of a sensor reinforced our purpose. As the sun climbed higher, the hum beneath the floorboards faded, replaced by the steady rhythm of our work. I paused occasionally to listen, but the only sounds were the gentle lapping of water against the pier and the distant cry of gulls. Around midday, Lucas approached me with a thoughtful expression. I have been thinking about the note we found. Whoever left it knows we are close to something big. They might try to sabotage the demonstration directly. I crossed my arms, considering his words. We have increased security, but we should also have a backup plan. If something goes wrong, we need to be able to shut down the system safely and protect the data. He nodded. I will rig a manual override that we can trigger from the control panel. It will cut power to the unit and isolate the signal. I appreciated his foresight. Good. Let's make sure it is simple enough to use under pressure. We worked together, running wires, labeling switches, testing the override until it clicked smoothly into place. Satisfied, we stepped back to admire our makeshift control station. The day waned, and the sky turned a deep shade of amber. Shadows stretched across the dock as the sun began its descent. I felt a familiar mixture of anticipation and nervousness, the same feeling that had accompanied me on countless mornings when Evelyn and I would set out on Sea Grace for a quiet ride. When the time came, we gathered our equipment: laptops, data loggers, the second breath unit, and the red life jacket Lily had found. Mara arrived with 2 additional observers from the Maritime Board, their badges glinting in the fading light. Lucas helped me set up the unit on the deck of Sea Grace, securing it to the rail with sturdy brackets. The device hummed softly as it powered up, a sound that now felt like a promise rather than a threat. Lily stood nearby, clutching the life jacket, her eyes wide with wonder. I knelt beside her, adjusting the jacket to fit her small frame. "You are going to watch something amazing," I whispered, brushing a strand of hair from her forehead. She nodded solemnly, her small hand gripping mine. We stepped back as the first test began. Water flowed into the test tank, simulating the conditions of a person overboard. Sensors detected the disturbance, and within seconds, the release valve triggered, releasing a bright orange buoy that shot to the surface and inflated with a soft hiss. The observers nodded, taking notes on their tablets. Mara smiled, her approval evident. "It works perfectly," she said, her voice steady. "The response time is within the required margin." I felt a swell of pride, tempered by the knowledge that our work was still under scrutiny. I glanced at the shore, where a dark sedan had been parked earlier but now sat empty, its windows reflecting the twilight. Just then, a soft crack sounded from the darkness near the tree line, a branch snapping under weight. My heart leapt, but I forced myself to stay calm. Lucas placed a hand on my arm, his grip firm. "Stay focused," he murmured. I took a deep breath, letting the salty air fill my lungs, and turned my attention back to the demonstration. The second test ran just as smoothly, the buoy deploying flawlessly each time. As the final test concluded, the crowd began to disperse, thanking us for the showcase. Lily ran up to me, her cheeks flushed with excitement. "That was awesome," she declared, throwing her arms around me in a tight hug. I returned her embrace, feeling the warmth of her small body against mine. "Thank you for being here," I whispered into her hair. Lucas joined us, clapping a hand on my shoulder. "We did it," he said, his voice low but full of satisfaction. Mara approached, her expression thoughtful. "You have done something remarkable today. The data looks solid, and the system performed as expected. Now we just need to get it out to those who need it most." I nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility settle on my shoulders like a familiar cloak. "We will." As the last of the visitors left, the dock fell quiet, except for the gentle lap of water against the pilings. I looked out at the horizon, where the sun had slipped below the edge of the sea, leaving a ribbon of violet and gold across the water. In that moment, I thought of Evelyn, of her quiet determination, of the countless hours she had spent sketching, testing, refining. Her vision was no longer a secret tucked away in a notebook. It was alive, breathing, ready to save lives. A sudden rustle in the bushes made me turn. A figure stepped out from the shadows. A woman in a dark coat, her face obscured by the brim of a hat. She held a small device in her hand, similar to the one we had found under the floorboards. For a heartbeat, the world seemed to hold its breath. Then she raised her hand, not in threat, but in greeting. "I am sorry for the scare," she said, her voice steady but tinged with regret. "I was sent to monitor the situation, not to harm you. My employer wanted to ensure the technology was not being misused. I studied her, trying to read her intentions." "Who sent you?" She hesitated, then spoke. a private firm that contracts with maritime companies. They heard rumors about a new safety system and wanted to verify its legitimacy. They did not anticipate the level of security you have. Lucas stepped forward, his expression guarded but not hostile. If you truly mean no harm, you will leave us alone now. She nodded, slipping the device into her pocket. I will relay that the test was successful and that there is no threat. I will also advise my client to cease any further surveillance. She turned and walked away, her footsteps muffled by the gravel path, disappearing into the night. I exhaled, the tension in my shoulders easing slightly. Lucas placed a hand on my back, his touch reassuring. We did well, he said softly. I looked at the sea once more, the water now a deep, dark mirror reflecting the first stars of the night. The journey ahead would not be easy, but we had proven that the idea Evelyn had nurtured could become a reality. I turned to Lily, who was watching the waves with wide eyes. Ready to go home? I asked. She nodded, clutching the life jacket to her chest. Can we come back tomorrow? I smiled, feeling a warmth spread through my chest that had nothing to do with the chill of the night. Of course. We will be here, ready to keep her dream alive. We walked back toward the house, the sand cool beneath our feet, the night air filled with the promise of tomorrow's work and the quiet certainty that we were on the right path. Lucas, the board meeting starts in an hour, I said, pulling the coat from the hook. He looked up from the notebook spread across the kitchen table, his eyebrows lifting. Did you review the latest data? I asked, sliding into the chair opposite him. He nodded, tapping a finger against the margin where a sketch of the valve lay. The pressure spike we saw last night matches the pattern from the cabin fire, he said, voice low. A chill ran down my arms despite the sweater I wore. Did anyone tamper with the sensor after the test? I asked, eyes narrowing. He shook his head, the motion sharp. The log shows no manual override, but the valve never opened, he replied. That suggests something blocked the mechanism, I said, leaning forward. He pushed the notebook toward me, the paper creasing under his palm. Look at this, he murmured, pointing to a series of numbers written in faded ink. I traced the lines with my thumb, feeling the faint ridges of the pen strokes. These are the calibration notes Evelyn made before the first sea trial, I whispered. His gaze met mine. Steady. We need to show the board that the system works when it's not interfered with, he said. I nodded, feeling a resolve settle like weight in my chest. Let's make sure they see the raw footage from the dock test, I said, standing. He rose, his movements deliberate, and we walked to the hallway where the old chest sat. The lid creaked as I lifted it, revealing the stack of Evelyn's journals wrapped in oilcloth. I pulled the top volume free, the leather worn soft at the edges. Inside, a page bore a sketch of a secondary release mechanism, drawn in her precise hand. She thought of a backup, I murmured, tracing the line with my fingertip. Lucas peered over my shoulder, his breath warm against my ear. If we can prove she built redundancy, it strengthens our case, he said. I closed the journal carefully, feeling the weight of her foresight. Let's take this to the board, I said, voice firm. We stepped onto the porch, the morning air crisp with the scent of pine and salt. A low rumble rolled from the driveway as a dark sedan idled near the gate, its engine ticking softly. I paused, hand on the rail, watching the vehicle. Lucas gripped my shoulder firmly, his hand steady on me. They've been watching, he said, eyes narrowed. I swallowed, the memory of the threatening note flashing behind my eyes. We won't let them scare us, I replied, forcing steadiness into my tone. He nodded, and we moved toward the car that would take us to the harbor office. The drive was quiet save for the hum of tires on wet pavement. I glanced at Lucas, his profile set against the passing trees. Do you think they'll try to sabotage the presentation? I asked, voice barely above the engine's murmur. He shrugged, a small smile tugging at his lips. They might try, but we have the proof, he said. I felt a spark of hope, flare, bright and sudden. The harbor came into view, boats bobbing gently against their moorings, gulls wheeling above the water. We parked near the office building, a modest structure with a sign that read, Maritime Safety Board, Public Hearings. Inside, the room smelled of polished wood and faint ozone from the old ventilation system. A long table dominated the center, chairs arranged in neat rows. 3 board members sat behind a raised desk, their expressions polite but wary. Lucas and I took seats opposite them, the wooden surface cool beneath my palms. I opened the folder, spreading Evelyn's journal page, the Coast Guard log, and the USB drive containing the test footage. The system activated automatically when Lily fell overboard. I began, voice clear, and it would have done the same for anyone else in that situation. I pressed play on the laptop, the screen filling with grainy footage of the life jacket inflating, the alarm tone soft but insistent. The board members leaned forward, eyebrows knitting as they watched. When the clip ended, silence hung for a heartbeat before the woman in the middle spoke. "This is impressive," she said, her tone measured, "but we need to verify that the device functions without external tampering." I nodded, sliding the USB forward. "The log shows no manual input. The pressure spike matches the sensor's expected response to sudden immersion," I said. She tapped a finger against the glass of the display, thinking. "What about the backup valve you mentioned?" she asked, eyes flicking to the sketch. I opened the journal to the page with the secondary mechanism. "Evelyn drew this as a fail-safe," I explained, tapping the line. "If the primary valve sticks, this secondary release will vent pressure after a set delay." The man on the left leaned in, tracing the sketch with a fingertip. "It adds redundancy," he murmured. "That could satisfy our safety standards," the woman added. Just then, the door burst open. A figure in a dark coat stepped inside, water dripping from the hem onto the polished floor. I recognized the silhouette from the night before, the woman who had approached us under the guise of a monitor. She lifted her hand, not in threat but in greeting, her voice steady despite the chill. "I'm sorry for the interruption," she said. "I came to deliver a message." Her gaze swept the room, landing on Lucas then on me. "The firm that hired me has reconsidered," she continued. "They wish to offer a partnership, not surveillance." I felt a flicker of suspicion, but kept my face neutral. "What changed?" I asked, voice even. She glanced at the door, as if expecting someone to follow. "They saw the test results, saw the redundancy, and realized the technology could benefit their fleet without exclusivity," she said, shifting her weight. "I was told to tell you that they will cease any further observation and will contact you directly through proper channels." She slipped a small card onto the table, the embossed logo catching the light. Then she turned and left, the door closing softly behind her. The room fell quiet again, the board members exchanging glances. The woman who chaired the meeting cleared her throat. "We will need to review the supplemental documentation," she said. "But what you've shown today meets our preliminary criteria for approval." I felt a warmth spread through my chest. Not the heat of anger, but the quiet glow of validation. Lucas squeezed my hand under the table, his smile genuine. "Thank you," I said, voice soft but firm. She nodded, the gesture formal yet respectful. "We will schedule the formal vote next week," she announced, rising. The others followed, gathering their papers. As we rose to leave, the lobby lights flickered once, then steadied. A soft chime echoed from the intercom, announcing an incoming call for the office. The secretary glanced at the display, then looked up at us with a puzzled expression. "It's a private line," she said. "The caller ID shows only a series of letters." I exchanged a look with Lucas, curiosity sparking like a small flame. "Answer it," I whispered. She lifted the receiver, her voice polite. "Maritime Safety Board. How may I help you?" A pause, then a voice, low and distorted, spoke through the speaker. "Tell them the valve will fail again." It hissed, then the line went dead. The receiver clicked back into its cradle, the hallway suddenly feeling colder. I rose from the wooden bench and smoothed the creases of my coat as the bailiff called the court to order. The gallery buzzed with murmurs. Reporters scribbled notes, and Brandon sat stiff-backed beside his lawyer, eyes darting toward the exit. I clutched the folder containing Evelyn's patents, the refusal letter, the USB, and the affidavit that named me as representative of the Evelyn Sterling Maritime Safety Fund. The judge's gavel fell, sharp and clear, and the room fell silent. "Mr. Sterling, you may proceed," the judge said, her voice steady but kind. I stood, feeling the weight of the papers in my hands, and began. "Your Honor, Evelyn Sterling was not only my wife but also a marine engineer who devoted her life to preventing needless loss at sea. She invented a system she called Second Breath, a device that automatically detects a person overboard and inflates a life-saving buoy without any manual activation. I paused, letting the words settle, then continued. She documented her work in sketches, logs, and a USB drive that holds the core algorithms. Before her passing, she refused a lucrative offer of $4,800,000 for exclusive rights, fearing the technology would be priced out of reach for ordinary mariners. I lifted the refusal letter, its ink slightly faded, and showed it to the court. The letter clearly states her intention to keep the invention open and humanitarian. It also names me as the person she trusted to oversee the fund that would develop and distribute the technology. I glanced at Lucas, who sat upright beside me, his hands clasped lightly on his lap. The fund was created through a legal transfer of intellectual property, a document signed by Evelyn and witnessed by Attorney Henderson. I filed the affidavit to activate that trust, ensuring the rights could not be claimed by anyone who merely bought the boat's hull. I placed the affidavit on the stand, the seal visible under the courtroom lights. Brandon's lawyer objected, his tone sharp. "Your Honor, the boat was sold for $46,000. The buyer received the vessel, not any patents or software." I felt a flicker of irritation but kept my tone measured. "Your Honor, the sale agreement never mentioned Second Breath because Evelyn had already severed those rights. The boat's hull is merely a platform. The invention belongs to the fund, not to the owner of the vessel." I turned to the judge, my gaze steady. The USB contains the final recording Evelyn made for me. In it, she explains her wish that the technology be used to save lives, not to enrich a few. I pressed play, and her soft voice filled the courtroom, speaking of hope and responsibility. A murmur rippled through the gallery. The judge leaned forward, her eyebrows knitting. "Mr. Sterling, do you have any evidence that Brandon Sterling knew about the separation of rights?" she asked. I inhaled, recalling the email trail we had uncovered. "Your Honor, we found correspondence where Brandon discussed the boat's sale price with Celeste, never mentioning any intellectual property. He treated the vessel as a simple asset, unaware, or perhaps unwilling to acknowledge, that the true value lay in the patents Evelyn had already placed beyond his reach." The judge nodded, then turned to Attorney Henderson. "Counselor, can you confirm the legitimacy of the transfer?" she asked. Attorney Henderson rose, his posture professional. "Your Honor, Evelyn Sterling filed a provisional patent for Second Breath on March 12, 2021. She later executed an assignment agreement, transferring all rights to the Evelyn Sterling Maritime Safety Fund, with Arthur Sterling named as fund representative. The documents are notarized and recorded with the county recorder's office. The fund's purpose, as stated in the charter, is to develop and disseminate maritime safety technology for public benefit." A soft chuckle escaped from Lucas, relieved. The judge's expression softened. "Based on the evidence presented, I find that Brandon Sterling sold only the physical boat. He did not acquire any rights to the Second Breath system. Consequently, the proceeds from that sale cannot be claimed as compensation for intellectual property he never owned." She paused, then continued. "Brandon Sterling, you are ordered to repay the full amount of loans taken for the Paris trip and Celeste's fashion venture, together with accrued interest and court costs. Celeste Sterling, you are held jointly liable for the same debts due to your participation in the scheme." She struck the gavel again, final and resonant. Gasps rose from Brandon's side. His shoulders slumped. Celeste buried her face in her hands, tears streaking her makeup. I felt a strange mixture of relief and sorrow, the weight of Evelyn's wish finally acknowledged by the law. As the courtroom began to empty, a court officer approached me, holding an envelope sealed with the prison's insignia. "Mr. Sterling, this arrived for you just now," he said, voice low. I broke the seal, unfolded the single sheet, and read Brandon's shaky script. "Dad, I'm sorry. I was wrong." The words trembled, the ink smudged where a tear had fallen. I folded the letter slowly, feeling the ghost of Evelyn's hand over mine, and tucked it into my coat pocket. The echo of the gavel lingered, a promise that her work would now sail forward, unmoored from greed. A sudden gust of wind rattled the window pane as I unfolded the letter from Brandon. The paper felt thin, The ink smudged where a tear had fallen. I read his shaky apology again, feeling the weight of his words settle like a stone in my palm. I slipped the envelope back into my coat pocket and stepped onto the deck of Sea Grace, the wood warm beneath my boots. Lucas stood near the mast, his hands resting on the polished rail. He turned as I approached, a smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "You look like you've seen a ghost," he said, his voice low and steady. I managed a half smile. "Just a letter from my son. He says he's sorry." He nodded, his gaze drifting to the horizon where the sun dipped low, painting the water in molten gold. Apologies don't change what's done, but they show he's finally facing it. I leaned against the rail, feeling the salt breeze lift strands of hair from my face. He never saw the value of what Evelyn built. He saw only wood and steel. Lucas turned his head, his eyes meeting mine. He saw a chance to make quick money. He never understood why she refused that offer for millions. I exhaled, watching a gull glide over the waves. She built something to save lives, not to line pockets. I think she knew someone like him would try to sell it short. He chuckled softly. And yet, here we are, turning her dream into something real. A soft creak came from the cabin door as a crew member stepped out, carrying a coil of rope. He nodded at us before disappearing below deck. "Do you think the system will hold up under real conditions?" Lucas asked, his tone sincere. I thought of the endless tests we'd run, the late nights poring over schematics, the moments when doubt whispered in my ear. It has passed every trial we could throw at it. The sea will be the final judge. He placed a hand on my shoulder, the gesture firm yet gentle. "We've done everything we can. Now we let it work." A sudden shout rose from the dock, a group of children laughing as they chased each other along the pier. Their voices carried on the wind, bright and carefree. I smiled, feeling a lightness I hadn't known in months. They remind me of Lily when she first stepped aboard. She laughed just like that. Lucas's eyes softened. "She's brave, just like her father." I turned to face him fully, the sun catching the flecks of gold in his hair. "You've become a good friend to her. And to me?" He shrugged, a modest gesture. "We both owe her that. She gave us a second chance, in different ways." A thought slipped into my mind, unbidden but clear. I reached into my coat and pulled out the envelope again, holding it up so the fading light caught the edge. "I keep this as a reminder," I said, voice quieter than before. Not of his mistake, but of what we chose to protect. He looked at the envelope, then back at me. "And what will you do with it?" I slipped it back into my pocket, feeling the paper's edge against my fingertips. "I'll let it stay there. It's part of the story now, not the reason for it." The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows that stretched across the deck like fingers reaching for the water. A distant horn sounded from a freighter heading out to sea, its tone low and resonant. "Do you ever think about what she'd say if she could see us now?" Lucas asked, his gaze fixed on the horizon. I let the question settle, feeling the breeze lift the hem of my shirt. "I think she'd smile. She always believed in action, not words." He nodded, his expression thoughtful. "Then we keep moving forward." A soft creak sounded from the starboard side as the boat shifted slightly with the tide. I gripped the rail, feeling the familiar vibration under my palms. "Ready to head back?" I asked, my voice steady. He gave a short laugh. "Always. The night shift starts soon, and we've got a watch to keep." We turned together, heading toward the cabin, the deck plates echoing our steps. As we passed the mast, I glanced back at the fading light, feeling a quiet certainty settle in my chest. The sea stretched out endless, calm, and full of promise. The sea stretched out boundless, calm, and full of promise. I stood at the rail a little longer, watching the gulls wheel above the water, then turned and walked down the gangplank onto the weathered planks of the pier. The wind had cooled, pulling the salt into my cheeks as I made my way to the small shed where we kept the spare life jackets. I pulled one free, inspected the stitching, and slipped it over my shoulders before heading toward the community boathouse, where the new rescue boat was moored. Inside, a group of teenagers were laughing, while they practiced tying knots under the watchful eye of an older volunteer. I handed the jacket to a girl with braids, her eyes wide as she fastened it, and stayed to watch her pull the line tight, her hands steady where mine once shook. Later, I walked along the shoreline to the place where Evelyn's prototype had first been tested, the concrete slab now worn smooth by tide and time. I knelt, placed a smooth stone I had picked from the deck atop the slab, and pressed my palm to the cold surface, feeling the vibration of distant engines fade into the hush of waves. When I rose, a child ran past, chasing a plastic bucket that bobbed in the surf, and I heard Lily's laughter echo in the memory of that sound. I did not speak of the envelope again. I let it rest in my pocket, a quiet weight that no longer drove me, but reminded me of the choice I made each day to build rather than break. As the sun slipped below the horizon, painting the sky in streaks of amber and violet, I turned toward the road home, my steps lighter, my heart open to the stories that still waited to be told. If you have ever turned a painful memory into something that protects others, I'd love to hear how you did it. Now that you have watched the narrator turn a painful memory into a quiet act of care, consider how your own struggles can become the very thing that shields someone else. When you take the weight of what hurt you and reshape it into a gesture, whether it's teaching a skill, sharing a story, or simply offering a steady hand, you transform pain into protection. That shift does not erase the past. It gives it purpose, letting the echo of your own fear become a lighthouse for another's courage. You might ask yourself, what is one way you have turned a painful experience into something that helps others, and how did it feel to see that impact? By answering that question, you invite your own story into the same tide that carried me forward, joining a current of resilience that lifts not just you, but everyone who steps onto the pier after you. In this way, the sea's endless promise is kept alive, not by grand declarations, but by the quiet, repeated choice to build rather than break, to protect rather than abandon. Let your answer be the next stone placed on the worn slab, a reminder that every act of care, no matter how small, sends ripples far beyond the moment it is made.